A series of grisly murders grip the suburban town of Woodsboro, striking fear amongst its residents. Still reeling from the death of her mother, Sydney Prescott and her friends begin to link the incidents together, but everybody's a suspect. Wes Craven's Scream breathed new life into a genre whose heyday was in the distant past. With Kevin Williamson's unique writing, delivered by a talented cast of TV and first-time actors, the film was immediately hailed as a genre classic. My name is Luke, and with me are Matt.
Did you really put her liver in the mailbox? Because I heard they found her liver in the mailbox next to her spleen and her pancreas.
And P.I.?
No! You listen here, you little bitch! You hang up on me again, I'll gut you like a fish, you understand?
All the right movies are flashing our shit around town like we're Sharon Stone or something. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to All the Right Movies, a podcast on classic and hit films that love scary movies. Today we're talking about a game changer, another one. It completely revived the horror genre, spawned a franchise, gave us one of the iconic horror villains, and even branched out into TV. It's Wes Craven's horror classic, Scream.
It really is.
Yes. Before we start talking about Scream, I'm going to mention Patreon again. Here it comes.
You want to scream about that?
Making me scream with that crack.
If you like scary movies or any other type for that matter, we've got you covered with a wide range of movies that we've talked about over the last 2.5 years on the podcast, all of which you can listen to by becoming an ATR and Patreon supporter. There are almost 90 podcasts available that you can't listen to anywhere else, and that number is rising all the time, and you can be involved in the show by voting for what we cover, and you can also ask us questions that we'll answer on the show. If you sign up, it allows us to continue to put out 5-star content that we do already, right?
Oh,
We're doing that already consistently.
Obviously.
So say we.
And we're ramping up our video production for YouTube, and we need support to help with that as well. So go to patreon.com/alltherightmovies to help us out. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yep. I'll scream in appreciation if you do.
That's an offer you can't refuse.
Probably not. You'll not hear it. Send you a little voice message just going, ah!
He will as well.
If that's not
He's not even
incentive enough
joking.
to sign up, I don't know what is.
You do that daily to us anyway.
Yeah.
Back to business then, chaps. First time we've talked about Craven on Classic, hopefully not the last. Matt, why do you want to talk about Scream?
This was just huge in 1996, wasn't it? It just seemed to be everywhere. Everyone was talking about it. And you have to put it in context. At that time, the idea for slasher film being a huge critical and commercial success was ludicrous. You know, Halloween, that was dead. Friday the 13th, that was a joke. And then this came along, and it was frustrating because I was only 16 when this came out. And, you know, with my babyish good looks, there was no way I was getting in to see it at the cinema. So, you know, didn't have this face for us. So I had to wait for it on VHS, and I just thought it was so worth the wait when it came along. Yeah. And obviously this year we've had the latest sequel, so it's still really influential, really iconic. And like a lot of films we talk about, you can tell its popularity because of all the imitators that came in its wake. And yet none have come close to the impact of this one.
I must pick you up on a comment that you made just a moment or two, Matt, when you said that Friday the 13th was ludicrous. Did you say something like that?
I mean, you know, he's walking around Manhattan by this point, isn't he?
That's fair enough, actually. Yeah.
Punching people's heads off.
What about you, P.I.? Why Scream?
Because I've been craving for Craven. No, I don't like many horrors. I don't like many horrors. People have probably heard us say that before. I am trying to rectify that. I have been watching more of them recently. But for a long time, I have been the opinion that they're just not my thing. However, this one, I have always enjoyed. I think I saw it at the perfect time, really. I think I was probably 17 or 18, so late 90s. Yeah. Definitely a year or two after it came out. So all the characters are kind of a similar age. Also, it felt really quirky. It just felt cool. It felt tongue-in-cheek. The Ghostface costume is really, really cool. I liked the side characters. I think for me, it just felt as if it was like a more accessible horror due to this kind of edge being taken off it. I think it's got this really over-the-top tone, which is something I just got a massive kick out of, like back when I first saw it. I'll be honest, I haven't seen it too many times over the years. I don't think I've wanted to spoil it for myself, but it is one which I remembered from back in the late 90s. And as a result, I've always had a soft spot for it. So I was looking forward to talking about this one. And which is strange because, like I say, I don't normally go for a horror.
It's the first time horror for you on the podcast, isn't it?
Absolutely, breaking me duck.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, this is a film that I only became aware of after a friend was talking about it at college, and I borrowed his VHS like the next day. And I was really disappointed in myself that I hadn't heard about it beforehand. I was furious that he knew about it and I didn't. How has this happened?
Competitive, Luke.
Yeah, but I watched it as soon as I came home from college the next day, VHS in hand, and I loved it so much that when I finished watching it, I rewound the tape and played it again back to back.
Wow.
You were going to say, I loved it so much that I just stole it and never returned it.
I thought he was going to say that.
I mean, obviously I did that.
Like you're going to come in with some excuse and say, "Oh, it snapped in the plate."
Yeah,
sorry.
Rewound off.
Yeah,
you're going to have to keep it now.
Yeah. Give you $5 to make up for
it. $5? The only thing you'd be offering like 99 pence or something new.
No, just a warm smile and a thumbs up.
And a thumbs up and a sorry about your tape.
Yeah. But Scream was exactly the kind of film that I was interested in, and it got me at the right age because I had an understanding of the genre already. I was a sucker for horror films then, and nothing obviously has changed in that department since. I've been banging on about that for 2.5 years. So I'm sure that regular listeners will know that.
22.5 years, I think you'll find.
Because I love the film, I've watched the sequels, are waiting with anticipation, but obviously ultimately being let down because none of them can hold a candle to the original. I still love it now, and any time a horror wins on the poll, I'm a happy man. So I'm happy to be covering this very much.
Good stuff.
Scream was written by Kevin Williamson and directed by Wes Craven, produced by Kathy Conrad and Kerry Woods for Woods Entertainment, distributed by Dimension Films and released on the 18th of December 1996. Filmed at various locations in Northern California, it stars Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, David Arquette, Skeet Ulrich, Matthew Lilliard, Rose McGowan, Jamie Kennedy and Drew Barrymore. We're getting straight into the thick of it. Turn off all the lights as we're discussing the blistering opening scene of Scream.
The beginning.
A cold opening and bang, possibly the greatest opening scene in horror history, as Casey Becker is getting ready for a night in front of the TV, but gets interrupted by an anonymous phone call. A great scene. Matt, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'd love to, because I've gone back, I've watched the original trailer, I've tried to find out, and as far as I can tell, I don't think it was common knowledge that Drew Barrymore was going to get killed.
Right.
Biggest name in the cast, and it's such an amazing way to start this film, killing off her in the first 10 minutes. But I think her performance is just so good, because she has to go from completely chilled out, someone looking forward to enjoying a night in front of the box, to just terrified out of her mind in about 10 minutes. And that descent is so believable and so intense. The way she goes from, like I say, pretty chilled, actually quite flirtatious with this guy a little bit intrigued by him. But then you can literally feel the pit of her stomach drop just when he says, "I want to know who I'm looking at." And she sells that moment. Amazing. And she just ramps up that intensity as it gets worse and worse. And she's so terrified, like when that doorbell goes off and she shrieks, "Who's there?" I mean, it's pretty obvious who's going to be there. You know, the guy on the end of the phone. But like, she's so out of her mind in terror. Like, she can't even think straight, and I think that's fantastic, that terror in her voice.
The only thing more terrifying, potentially, than it being the guy on the phone is if it was Michael Barrymore knocking at the door, do you not think?
Why?
So, yeah, and that, like, sheer terror, she's got into voice when she's begging to be left alone, and it kind of goes into anger. And I love it when she starts talking about Steve, her boyfriend. He's big and he plays football and he'll kick the shit out of you. Yeah. So, yeah, I think she's brilliant.
Tears, isn't she?
She is, she's bursting into tears, really fantastic. And for someone who isn't in the film an awful lot, she makes such an impression just for this 10 minutes. I think it's fantastic. But do you know how she got into that, like, frenzied state of mind on set, though?
No.
In real life, she's a massive animal lover, and she was talking to Wes Craven before filming that she'd read this story in the paper, and it was about a dog that got set on fire by its owner. It's a really horrible story.
Grisly.
Wow.
And as she was telling Wes Craven, she's like bursting into tears. So, like, when they got to filming, when Craven needed her to go over the edge in a complete hysterics, he'd sidle up to her and go, "Drew, I'm lighting the lighter."
Fucking hell.
Yeah, I mean, harsh.
And that sent her into some kind of tearful frenzy.
Yeah, she just started thinking about this dog getting set light.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Well, whatever does it for you, like if you're going to
Well,
eat
yeah, I
that
mean, it worked, to
performance
be
out
fair.
of someone, but I concur, Matt. I think she's absolutely fantastic.
Oh, she's amazing. There's a moment that I really love. She's had the phone call after phone call. The doorbell rings, then the phone goes off. She's jumping out of her skin, and she asks, is this a joke? And he says, more of a game, really. Can you handle that? Fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Really memorable, terrifying stuff.
Mm-hmm.
During filming this scene, Barrymore was given a live landline, and being caught up in the scene, she accidentally dialed 911, which alerted the authorities when she was screaming and shouting and crying down the phone. And they called back concerned about her welfare. And it's quite a ballsy move to have the biggest star in the film, like on the front cover, die in the opening scene. Similar thing that Hitchcock did with Janet Leigh in Psycho.
Mm-hmm.
Craven said, the fact that we killed America's sweetheart at the end of 15 minutes, it was like a body punch to the audience.
Yeah, totally is.
And it was Barrymore's idea. Craven wanted her in the part of Sydney, but she thought it would have more of an impact if she played Casey. It was a quick gig as well. She'd done her scenes in 5 days. She said, in horror, my biggest pet peeve was that I always knew the main character was going to be slugging through until the end. What I wanted to do is take that comfort zone away so that we would establish that the rules don't apply in this film, and it does.
Oh, totally.
I think also a big shout out got to go to the voice of Ghostface. Really chilling stuff.
Yeah. Yes.
That was provided by Roger Jackson, who provided the voices for animated TV show The Powerpuff Girls. Seems like a natural progression from this film.
I can see Wes Craven settling down to watch that like, there's me guy.
There's the guy. He would go on to do the voice in all the sequels as well. And the actors never met him because Craven thought that reactions would be more genuine if they couldn't put a face to the voice. So his dialogue was not pre-recorded. He was there interacting with the actors in the scene, sitting in a tent outside.
Yeah.
And it was pissing it down. He was
Specifically a tent.
shivering
shivering in a really tiny tent.
And the original plan was to have his voice as like a placeholder and for it to be looped in by another actor later on. But Craven stuck with him, describing his voice as intelligent evil.
Yeah, I think it works great.
But he didn't physically play Ghostface. That was stuntman Dane Farwell. And there were a few moments where Farwell didn't play Ghostface. And one of them comes in this scene where Casey smashes him in the face with the phone through the window.
Yeah.
That's Wes Craven.
That was good.
Really?
I thought you were going to say,
wow.
that's Michael Barrymore.
From one Barrymore to another.
Just, I mean, the way that he is a nimble mover, Ghostface in this scene, and as is Barrymore, he's fleet of foot, so he's light in the lover. So, so I always assumed that behind the mask was Mickey Barrymore from British TV fame.
If anybody like who isn't from the 80s and 90s and British doesn't know who Michael Barrymore is, he was a disgraced TV presenter.
Yeah. Light entertainer.
Light entertainer, yes. Light on his feet, light entertainer.
Stabs her right in the hot spot.
Top, middle, or bottom, hotspot.
That was a game show I used to present called Strike It Lucky, for anyone who doesn't know. That is for everyone who has got no clue what we're talking about.
For everybody who's listening. So, which we have referenced in the past. I can't remember what episode it was on, but we have referenced that.
Strike It Lucky. Like.
Well, my favourite part in this scene is the game, the movie trivia quiz.
Yeah.
You're brilliant.
I loved it when I was 16 because I could answer the questions. Casey remembers Michael Myers is the killer in Halloween, but she's tricked by the Friday the 13th question. She thinks she's nailed it at first. Jason, I saw that movie 20 goddamn times. And what I love about that is that Jason is so identifiable in your mind's eye that he is the killer in Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
He's massive. He's got the hockey mask, the machete. He's on the front cover. It's Jason, but obviously not in the original. That was Mrs. Voorhees.
Yes.
Casey wouldn't have been the only one sucking into this answer. I'm sure certain audiences would have thought the same, which I think would strike fear into people, thinking, fuck, I would have got that wrong and my insides will be on the outside by now.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, brilliant, yeah.
Really good. And I think what's really heartbreaking here is Casey's response and Barrymore's delivery. Drew, not Michael. when she says, "You tricked me." It's really, she's like almost resigned herself to the fact that she's done for. You tricked me. It's awful.
Yeah. Sounds like a child when she does that line.
Yeah, she does. She does. I also like that Steve gets gutted, and maybe you're thinking, like, how is this possible? The killer's on the phone. But it's only upon rewatches that you realise that this is Billy and Stu as a double act here.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. What about the sound effect, though? When Steve gets gutted, it's almost like it's the sound of his insides falling out or something. There's no one around him, and there's a sound. It's a weird sound effect.
Yeah, well, I've got a few questions about the speed in which Steve gets gutted. It's literally 5 seconds from the camera on Steve where he's fine. Well, I mean, he's tied up, but he's fine. To Casey putting the lights on and his organs are everywhere. That is not possible.
So basically, the person playing Ghostface was incredibly fleet of foot. Definitely Michael Barrymore.
Must have been Michael Barrymore then. There's no other explanation for it. But I think this issue, it's got something to do with the editing. There's a shot of Steve looking fine, but in the audio is the sound of him making noises in pain, but doesn't match the visual. And this is one of the few things that I've got an issue with on screen, because it's always bothered me since I first saw it, really. Steve's not the only thing that was butchered. The MPAA demanded cuts to take back the intensity of the scene. And I just don't think it's done fantastically well here.
No.
Not at all.
Yeah, so I want to talk really about what I guess is the sort of the whole ending to this short little scene. I think because I just think it really just turns and just grabs you by the balls, or, guts you, essentially. Really, really makes you stand up and take notice. If you haven't done already, then you do by the end. It's fantastic. I think from the moment that we see Drew Barrymore's character kind of going out and hiding in the garden, and then she looks and she spots her parents' car returning. And it's that age-old, I suppose, horror trope, but it's used so well here. The threat is massive. She's scared out of her mind the way Matt's describing, and she sees this kind of, probable route to safety. There's the car. They're almost home. You're kind of guessing that she's almost out of danger, and then just boom, massive sound effect. She's attacked just so viciously. Like that slow motion chase where the knife is just plunged into her chest from behind. Really slow-mo. You really almost see it going in almost. Yeah. Followed by the sound of like her badly affecting the breathing. The score that comes on in the background is great. That comes just after that knife is like thrust into her neck. Like that was a massive shock to see that her kind of gasping at the knife wound in her neck. And then again, like even more brutality, the parents arrive back in the house and they can hear her cries on the phone, and they can hear the attack. And like, you can just imagine that as an ordeal, going through that, like utterly terrifying. Like, imagine being a parent and listening to essentially your daughter dying over the phone and thinking it's really, really dreadful, that. So I think in terms of it being a horror, at this point, it's fantastic stuff. You get a real sense of that. You get a real sense of this kind of ordeal, I suppose both on and off screen, over the phone and what you're seeing at the same time. And then I love the shot of her being dragged off by the legs where her arm kind of trails up behind her and the phone is still connected to her parents. It's just totally iconic horror imagery, that. Really, really memorable. And so it's the shock of, like Matt was saying, this complete move from fairly innocent, I suppose, geek on the phone, kind of trying to chat a girl up, to what ensues, which is this panic and this massive, massive shock and impact of this brutal death scene, and watching her basically hung up at the end of a tree branch. It's just, it goes from one extreme to the other, and it's massive.
It is, yeah. It's a huge. I mean, it's a perfect ending to this, like, really, really shocking, visceral scene, isn't it?
Yeah.
Obviously, Scream is a homage to classic slashers, and we'll talk about that as we go, the late 70s, early 80s. There are a number of references to the genre, one of which is the dialogue between Casey's parents here. Her dad says, take the car, drive down to the Mackenzies, call the police. In Halloween, Laurie says to the two kids, go down the street to the Mackenzies' house.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so this leads us to our first Patreon question. As I mentioned, there are various benefits of joining All the Right Movies Patreon, and one of them is where you can get to ask questions, which we'll answer on the show. Our first one is from frequent contributor Kenny Morrison. Hello, Kenny.
Always a joy, Kenny.
Kenny says, one of the best opening scenes in movie history, in my opinion. What other films have grabbed you by the neck and pulled you in immediately like that? P.I., do you want to take this?
I think the opening's fantastic. Probably the best scene of the film, to be honest, for me. Kind of a little short story of its own. The ones that immediately spring to mind are some of my favourite ever films. The future war scene at the start of Terminator. The opening credits of Seven, which are probably my favourite opening credits. They just immediately draw you into that film. You know, with that kind of weird imagery of what's John Doe doing, and then when you watch it back after you've seen the film. Anyway, we'll not go into that. We've covered that on Seven. Fantastic, though. The first death in the car park. I don't want to steal your thunder, but out of Zodiac, Luke, I imagine you're probably going to say that one.
Yeah, I am.
And the other one I thought of was the opening to Mississippi Burning, when we see the civil rights boys being murdered. That one's brutal, and that's always stuck with me. Those are the ones that I immediately thought of, like all massively impactful openings for me then.
Yeah, I agree. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, two came to mind. First one, I need John for this one, to be honest, because it's the 2009 version of Star Trek. The opening of that was pretty incredible. I thought it was almost like a little kind of mini film in itself, which gives you all the backstory to Kirk and Kirk's father who died, saving his life. That's fantastic. But the one that came to mind first, and is more fitting for this episode because it's alright, is It Follows from a few years ago.
Yeah,
the opening to that, fantastic, so creepy, so eerie. It's this girl just comes running out of the house, clearly panicked, scared by something. And then the camera does a whole 360 and you can see there's nothing there, but she's terrified by something. And then she goes driving off in the car. She ends up at a beach in the middle of the night. And then you just cut to her at the beach during the middle of the day, but it's just her mangled corpse. And I remember watching that, the similar thing, holy shit, where the fuck is this film going to go?
Yeah.
Fantastic opening, that.
Yeah, great film as well.
It is. Love it.
Take your word for it.
And you were right to say, PI, the opening scene of Zodiac is the one that immediately came to my mind. Yeah, the Lovers Lane car park.
It is fantastic. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Watching that scene, I'm locked in for the next 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Easy. But in the horror genre, obviously, you've got Halloween. I think Texas Chainsaw had such an impact. Jaw's the same. But I'm going to say my favourite from the genre is from When a Stranger Calls, 1979. I'm sure that this film took a lot of inspiration from that opening scene as well. One of my all-time faves, it goes at a similar length. The babysitter's calling from inside of the house. It's real tension. And it does keep you there. And I'm not going anywhere for 90 minutes, but you really wish that you would, because the rest of the film is garbage. It's so dull. It just does not match up to that opening scene at all.
Just watch that bit.
Yeah.
Right.
Great question, though, Kenny. Thank you very much.
It was. Really good.
Cheers, Ken.
And from one Patreon supporter to another, just a note on a moment in a scene after this scene where Tatum is telling Sid about Casey's murder outside the school.
Yes.
There's a tracking shot of the two of them walking into school, and behind them is an extra in a tan coat. He's rocking like a double arm backpack, and he's shuffling around. He's looking left a lot and kind of looks out of place. This guy is a friend of one of our patrons. Justin Fellas is the patron, and the guy in the scene is called Alistair Hamilton. So big shout out to Alistair, wherever you are. Good effort.
Well done, Ali.
Alistair. Well done.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
So after this scene, we're introduced to Sydney and Billy boyfriend, who sneaks into her bedroom window. Sydney goes to school the next day, and we meet her extended friends group. In the scene that we're looking at, Sydney is left home alone while her dad is out of town and gets a familiar Scary Movies phone call. And I'm going to get us going on this one. Firstly, I like the setup, the beauty of Sydney's surroundings next to the horrors of what's happening. I like that, but it also shows how isolated she is, which kind of mirrors Casey Becker's surroundings. There's nobody else around, and there wasn't for Casey either.
Exactly,
she was isolated like that. And I like that it's hinted at, but not confirmed, what happened to Sydney up until this scene. Tatum makes reference to her outside the school. So she says it's bad, almost as bad as, well, it's bad,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah.
And Himbry does a similar thing just before Sid comes in to speak to the police. But it's not until this scene that the pieces of the jigsaw are put together and we're introduced to Gail Weathers on the TV.
Yes.
Great. Well, what I like about this moment with Ghostface on the phone is that we've seen this already. Similar to the surroundings, Casey had a similar phone call, and look what happened to her. So on first watch, all bets are off. You don't know what's going to happen. Is Sydney going to go here? We just don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's completely lost now on rewatch upon rewatch, but
Yeah.
No, you're dead right. On
First
first
watch.
viewing, immediately
Yeah.
the tension's ramped up immediately.
Yeah. It's all up for grabs.
it is. And I like Campbell's performance here. You can see her vulnerability because she's also got that inner resolve when she tries to call the bluff of the voice on the phone and goes outside. And another shout out to Roger Jackson here. Great voice work. Maybe because I'm not Randy. It's great. Yeah. But the winner for me is the comment that he snarls when she's going to hang up on him. If you hang up on me, you're going to die just like your mother. Great delivery.
Horrific.
And a really nice payoff to what we've just been told in this scene about Sydney's previous traumas. And the shot's tight on her face when that line comes in, and it just makes my stomach drop. Fuck.
Yeah.
It's a great moment.
I like the attack in the house itself, to be honest. I've always felt it unusually comedic. The way that Ghostface just gets like booted off by Sydney like fairly easily a number of times. The way she sweeps his legs at one point, it feels like really cartoony, and that like really fast chase up the stairs, it's like something like Wacky Races or something.
Yeah.
I love it. I think my favourite moment in the sequence is Ghostface slashing away with his arm through the gap through the gap in the door. So obviously it's great that the lock's been smashed, but she's cleverly kind of moved the closet door in the way. So luckily kind of built up a kind of two-pronged defense, so to speak. And then he can't get in, so he's just swinging away with a knife. And again, it's really cartoony. You can hear this like swipey sound effect.
Yeah.
It really feels comedic, but for some reason, normally I think that would put me off, and it doesn't. I love it.
No, I think it's great, that sound effect.
Yeah, I do.
It is. It's great. There's an excellent shot with Sydney in kind of close focus, and in the background, out of focus, you can see Ghostface trying to force himself through that gap, and I think that looks great. That's one of my favourite shots in the film, to be honest. I even enjoy the moment when she's like forced to call the police with the computer, and that really builds the tension because you just know that's going to take an eternity.
Yeah, dial up. Forget about it.
You think, oh no, it's going to be 15 minutes before she gets to actually to tell anyone. Like, I think what falls into place with Billy though is quite clever. It's made to look fairly obvious that he's the guy behind the mask, or so it leads us down that path.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we'll get the curveball of the story pretty much immediately after, when we find out about this alibi and we're told that it couldn't have been him because he didn't have time to make the calls, etc. So I like the way that the scene kind of plans out. It throws you down one direction, takes you back another not so long after.
Yeah. You kind of mentioned it, P.I. The film often gets criticised for the clumsiness, shall we say, of Ghostface. I mean, he gets busted up quite a bit.
He does. Gets filled in left, right and centre.
Oh, he does. He gets hit and knocked on his arse loads. Well, there was a moment removed from this scene where he gets hit over the head with a picture and sends him tumbling down the stairs for the better.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, again, that's totally slapstick, as if it wasn't enough with him getting his legs swiped and stuff. That's just on the right side of kind of tongue-in-cheek.
I agree.
But getting battered down the stairs would be like Pink Panther or something.
It's not in the final cut either, but when Sydney is dialing the police through the computer, she puts her address down as 34 Elm Street, obviously a nod to another Craven classic.
Yeah.
Much like in Halloween, the costume for Ghostface was decided on set. In the screenplay, the costume just simply said Ghost Mask Killer. And they went through a load of ideas and worked with the costume department, but nothing stuck. That is until there was scouting locations for a house for the end scene. And there was this mask that producer Marianne Madalena spotted. Craven loved it, negotiated a deal with Fun Mask, the company who produced it. But Bob Weinstein wasn't so convinced and considered replacing Craven because of it. He said he was making a ridiculous film. But Weinstein was sent some dailies of the opening scene and obviously had a change of heart. Of course he did.
Yes. Yeah.
I like it when the cops turn up, though, and Billy does get arrested, because for starters, you've got like the really dramatic escape from Sid, gets to the front door, gets that front door open, and there's Dewey just stood there holding the mask up in midair, in her face. And then out of the two of them, it's him that lets out this really girly shriek. Like he's the one who's like scared the most out of the two of them. It's really funny stuff.
Yeah.
And it just... I think it just brings the tone down nicely after like this really quite intense scene. It gets quite funny because it's the same when Tatum arrives and she takes charge of the scene. She says, "Oh, Sid's going to stay at our house tonight," and Dewey completely freaking out. Does Mom know? Like, the deputy sheriff in the town, and he's still scared about what his mom's going to think. Like, obeys his mom's rules because he still lives in the house. That always makes me chuckle. But I think like Skeet Ulrich is very, very good in this scene. I do like that ambiguity of Billy as the killer, how it's played here, because he drops the phone and he does look inherently sinister, but you're thinking, is he too obvious? Is that double bluff? Is he red herring? I think it's played so well. And as P.I. says, he gets to the police station. I really like that scene, but he's got an alibi. You know, he's really convincing. He says, "I didn't kill anybody," and the way he's looking at Sid. Yeah, all fantastic. I just love how all the kind of clues are just thrown up constantly by this film. I think this scene does a really good job of that.
Yeah, it does, yeah. I mean, I don't know why Sydney is like not 6 feet away from Billy in the police station. Because of the trauma of the event, he should be out of eye shot, surely.
No, there should
instead
be
of just
no
like
idea
peering at a paw in the glass.
Yeah.
You might as well be sitting on a knee, to be honest.
He's right there. A very nice touch in the film is the inclusion of the actor Joseph Whipp, who plays the sheriff. He's got that like toilet seat hair.
Yes.
Dewey Superior.
Yeah.
He plays a copper in A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Craven said, so the backstory there is that he was so upset by the events in Nightmare on Elm Street that he moved to a small town in Northern California.
Oh, right.
Nice.
Elaborate that, like.
I think that may have been made up after the fact.
Yeah.
By Craven.
People will realise that we've used him in the same role in 2 different films, so I'll just say that's the reason.
So with horror conventions being thrown out the window, the opening of Scream has one foot in the past, with the other paving the way for the future.
The director.
We're going to talk about the main man in this section, Wes Craven, who was the horror maestro, the master of the macabre. P.I., what do you think of Craven's work on Scream?
I think directorially it's really impressive. Clearly a man who, knows the genre so well inside out. I think that much can be seen in every scene, especially with it when you've got the blood and the gore and especially the shock factor, which we've already talked about from the very first scene. The characters are memorable. Really importantly, I think his tone, I think you can see that throughout, and it's a cool tone. I really like it. I think you can really see his style in this film, certainly around the shock factor. But like I was going on about before, but I like that kind of comic book, or if you want to sort of describe it as a cartoony aspect that's associated with this film, that really links in with what I know about Wes Craven, to be honest. I think I see similarities in this with Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, I know you probably disagree, but I've always found that quite funny. And so certainly the tone and the shock factor that I get from Nightmare on Elm Street is reflected, I think, in Scream. I see both similars have a decent sort of shock factor. Certainly that's the way I take them. But like I say, both films make us laugh to a certain degree, but both of them really do have a lot of tension and a lot of build-up to the scenes. So, Craven is a legendary horror film director. I don't think that's a stretch to say that at all. And definitely this film has went some way to cementing that legacy.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. What I think is lost on me, because I've seen it so many times, is that the film's a pretty fantastic whodunit.
Yes, absolutely.
You're constantly chopping and changing your mind who the killer is. And I think a lot of that is down to Craven's direction. Admittedly, it's pretty heavy-handed in some scenes. The finger is pretty much pointed at every character in the film.
Yeah.
But it does keep you on your toes and does constantly keep you guessing. I like the one where the sheriff is in the frame because we see his big boots put the cigarette out, similar boots we see in the school bathroom. I like that one.
Yeah.
But for that opening scene alone, Craven gets big props here. It's so tightly constructed. I love the shots of Ghostface lurking around the house and the tension's ramped up to fever pitch, but also the brutality of that murder, like you mentioned, P.I. And I really don't think the likes of some of the other directors in the frame that we'll talk about in a moment could have pulled this off. I think it takes a seasoned pro who's been around the horror block a few thousand times to understand how to construct a scene like this. And I think what Craven does better than most that had come before it is to make you care about these characters. Casey's dying at the start is a real kick in the balls, and we only know her through a conversation on the phone, but we're given enough to know that she isn't the usual madman fodder that most first kills are in the genre. And most characters in the genre are pretty forgettable.
Mm-hmm.
Same goes with Tatum as well. And a lot of that is on the performance and the writing, of course, but Craven is guiding all of that, I think.
I think he feels really invigorated by this film. I think because
Oh,
before
yeah.
this, he'd done Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which I think the critics had liked, but the public hadn't.
Yeah.
It'd been pretty low grossing. But with Scream, it probably was the right film at the right time. And it just feels like he's like, yes, this works. It's like a fresh canvas. He's not doing Freddy again. He's not having to go back to the well. He's got something really new to work with. And I think he just feels really energized because of that. So putting together those kill sequences and those suspense sequences, you know, something's there, it's gone, now it's over there, boom, it's jumping out, shit, run, it's got them. Brilliantly done, really brilliantly done. And you can be kind of sniffy about those sequences, but they're done here masterfully well. They still stand up so well. And I think what's interesting is how grounded this film is. Like Nightmare on Elm Street, that's obviously all about nightmare logic, surrealism, but this is much more grounded. This is reality, really. And Craven still feels very, very at home with it. The only thing he does stylistically is there's loads of Dutch angles in this film, you know, where the camera
all over the place.
all over the place. I mean, the camera's never straight; it's always tilted. It's like, you know, the old Batman series, you know. But it makes it feel really uneasy.
Yeah.
And ultimately, for me, I think what he does with this film, it's that word that P.I. mentioned, it's tone. Because I think Scream could have gone two ways tonally. It could have been really harsh, really grim. It could have been like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, which, you know, it's a great film, but no one wants to watch that one twice. But it could have gone the other way, and it could have been too soft. It could have been like Poltergeist when we talked about that, Luke, and he said, you know, that's like a horror house fairground ride, things going, whoa, and jumping out at you. But, you know, you go on one of those rides, and who's talking about that 10 minutes later, let alone years down the line, like this film? So, totally, Craven just gets like a bullseye because he knows he's got a great script. He knows he's got a good cast. He doesn't have to worry about those aspects. He just concentrates on delivering the visceral thrills of this film. And Scream ends up being the kind of ride where you get to the end and you go, I want to do that again. As you obviously did, Luke.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, I love it. Lovely, Matt. Very nice. Well, Craven was the studio's choice for the hot seat of Scream, but having made horror movies his bread and butter, he wanted to take a break from the genre and declined it on 2 separate occasions.
Right.
Okay.
So there were a few big-time directors who were approached: George A. Romero, Sam Raimi, Robert Rodriguez, Danny Boyle. They were all discounted because they saw the film as a comedy.
Right.
And Craven was the studio's boy because of his approach to horror. He said, you can't be funny when somebody's dying, which is a fair comment.
Yeah.
Instead, he looked for humour in the tension between the death scenes. However, according to Scream 4, Robert Rodriguez did direct Stab, the film series within the Scream film series, so I think that's a nice callback.
Yes, he does, yes.
Craven was eventually tempted to the project for 2 reasons. One, Drew Barrymore was signed on as the lead. Obviously, that changed. And the other was a chance encounter with an 11-year-old who told him that The Hills of Eyes was his favourite movie, but that he thought that Craven had gone really soft in recent years.
Was that 11-year-old you, Luke?
I was about to say, was that?
And that
story
child's
about
name
yourself, Luke?
was Luke Cardy.
It was me. Craven, what you doing? Enough of these people under the stairs shit. Screen producer Kathy Conrad said, Wes is such a great classic storyteller that I think it really needed his classicism on top of Kevin's postmodernism to really make Scream synergistically what it was. But he wasn't the only director in the conversation, which leads us to our second Patreon question.
Right,
and this one is from Peter Sutcliffe.
Hello, Peter.
He says, having seen the list of other directors who were attached to the film before Craven, who else would you have liked to seen helmet?
Right.
Matt?
My honest answer is I wouldn't have liked to see anyone else helmet because I think of what Craven brings to it, it's only him that would have brought it. But to play along, I think Romero could have been an interesting choice. You know, get him out of the zombie genre. All his dead films, there's always something going on at a script level. You know, they're never just shallow flicks. So I think he might have responded to the script pretty well. But I do think the name we've mentioned there a couple of times, Robert Rodriguez, could have been quite interesting just because back then in the 90s, all his films were very stylish, that load of flair despite being really low budget. So he could have given it actually quite a different spin, which might have been interesting.
Very nice. What about you, P.I.?
Well, I'm going to address Peter directly here. And Peter, I've got a confession to make. Because like Matt, I don't think I'd like to have seen any of the rest of those names directed, if I'm honest. Certainly not over WC. I think, as Matt was sort of alluding to before as well, the tone is definitely what makes this film for me. It astounds me. I'm not sure if it would have been anywhere near the same with the other names. I mean, for me, Craven is a massive part of why I appreciate this film. He's the man behind the camera who gives this story like the real spark that I particularly enjoy. So I'm just not sure if I'd like to see it under any other directorial style, really, especially considering just how sort of sensitive I am with the horror genre, how actually I really enjoy. So I wouldn't want to have necessarily have seen another take on this film.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm totally with you. But if Craven didn't want to do it, I kind of like Sam Raimi for it. I think he can strike a good balance between the tones. Although I'm looking at it from the point of view of directors at the time, and Raimi had kind of lost his horror mojo at this point.
Yeah.
And he did bring it back, I suppose, with Drag Me to Hell a little later on. So I think it would have been in safe hands, but he turned the Evil Dead series, and you know, it's his series, he can do what he wants with it. It gets silly. It gets silly with Army of Darkness.
Yeah.
But really, at this point, if it wasn't Craven, I would love to have seen Tarantino at the helm. Right. Just after Pulp Fiction, I don't think it's a stretch to think that this could be a QT script, the amount of pop culture references. What I'm hoping for more than anything is that his much hyped 10th film is a horror film, because that's glaring omission from his CV.
It is.
It is. Good point.
Great question, though, Peter. Thank you.
Yep.
Great guy.
Thank you, Mr. Sutcliffe.
We mentioned the Scream mask. The costume was another matter. The original plan was to have Ghostface in white robes, but in testing, they realised it resembled far too closely the robes of the KKK, so quickly changed it to black. A good idea.
Yeah, for the best.
Yes.
For the best.
The costume in the film's called Father Death. Craven put that in there on purpose to make audiences subconsciously think it was Sidney's father who was the killer.
Right. Okay.
I mentioned on our Elm Street Patreon podcast, but Craven and Sam Raimi had a friendly rivalry going throughout their careers. It started in The Hills of Eyes, where there's a torn picture of what looks like a Jaws poster in one of the scenes. And Raimi saw this as Craven saying, Jaws isn't real horror, this is. And Raimi returned the favour in The Evil Dead with a torn picture of The Hills of Eyes in the basement.
Yeah.
Craven then came back in Elm Street, where Nancy's watching The Evil Dead but is falling asleep to it. And then Raimi had Freddy's glove in the barn in Evil Dead 2. So not to be outdone, Craven took a swipe back at Raimi in Scream, near the end when Randy's taking votes on what they should watch. How many Evil Dead? How many Halloween? Obviously, Halloween wins out.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
In your face, Raimi. So with a string of horror classics in the 70s and 80s, Wes Craven added another to his list in the 90s with Scream.
The cast.
There's a big cast in Scream, and we're focusing on the two female leads in this section. First up, adding a new Scream Queen icon to the genre, Neve Campbell as Sidney Prescott. Matt, what do you think of Campbell as Prescott?
I think it's a performance you have to put in the context of the genre, because I'm not going to sit here and go, oh, Neve Campbell in Scream, absolutely astonishing, just incredible stuff. Because I'm going to be honest, it's not. But what you have to do is compare her to just about every other Final Girl performance, and she is head and shoulders above them all. You know, I don't think she's as good an actress as Jamie Lee Curtis by any stretch, but I think she gives a better performance than Jamie Lee Curtis does in Halloween.
Yeah, I agree.
Again, look who comes after this. I mean, are we really going to sit and even try to pretend Jennifer Love Hewitt in I Know What You Did Last Summer is up here with Neve Campbell? It's just obviously not. For what she has to do in this film, I think she makes Sidney Prescott a pretty iconic Final Girl, because she's smart, she's gutsy, but she's not a superwoman. She has vulnerabilities. And I think the best thing that Campbell does in the film is she gives Sidney some weight. There's a lot written in this character about what happened to him, or the mystery behind that. And I think Campbell puts across the sense that all of that is weighing down on Sidney, and it's giving her issues. She's not like an empty-headed cheerleader character. Neve Campbell gives her something. She makes her a little bit mysterious. So, yeah, I think for this genre, Campbell, pretty much as good as you can get.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like, in the confines of a horror film, I think the character of Sidney is very well written. Like you said, you've got to take that within context, haven't you?
Yeah.
And we were introduced to her as she's already gone through this horrific ordeal, which confirms her strength of character. And it makes it easy to believe that if Sidney could get through that, then she's a match for another deranged killer. But the beauty of the story turns out to be that it's the same killer or killers that she's fighting against. She just didn't know it. Nice twist.
Yeah.
And like you, I think she's iconic as Heather Langenkamp or Jamie Lee Curtis, but she certainly puts in a better performance than both in their respective films.
Yeah, totally.
And I think she plays the pain about her mother's killer very well. She's got the vulnerability and confusion about what's going on. She was certain that Cotton Weary was her mother's killer, but evidence now points to the contrary. But Campbell's portrayal of that anguish is great. She's wrestling with her beliefs to suppress the idea that it wasn't Cotton who did the dirty. I really like that. And physically, she's also great because that's something that is often lacking in the genre as well.
I was potentially going to be really harsh and say I don't think she really grabs me attention, but that's not true. That was probably what I would have said if I hadn't watched this again, a couple of times over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
She definitely does play the aspects of Sydney's character quite well. And like you're saying, Luke, I like that she has this real gutsy and hardened side to her kind of a makeup, which has come about definitely as a result of what she's been through with her mother's death, with the kind of brutality of her and the knowledge of what happened to her mother. And I think that does come across well in the film and the way Campbell plays that. I agree as well. I don't think in general she is a particularly fantastic actor. Agreed again. That's fine, because considering the number of terrible acting performances with similar characters and in horror movies in general, this did go on to be a massively iconic film, probably the horror film of its generation. Genre defining almost. Where she went to after that in terms of her own acting, she's hardly been knocking back roles after this, even though she does put in a good performance. But we've hardly seen her in anything much afterwards, have we? So I wouldn't really say that she's gone on to forge a massive career. She's not a massive name. That's kind of my point. I think we do see that she's limited as an actress here, but that's fine, because she's definitely as memorable, I think, a lead character or in that role as most of the other ones and the ones that you're comparing her to. What I was actually going to say, which I think is an interesting point, I would have liked to have seen Drew Barrymore play the role, and Neve Campbell played the role at the start. Obviously, you covered that before with the reasons why that didn't work out. I would have liked to have seen it, because I think Sydney could have been an even more impactful character if it had been Barrymore. But then that would have detracted from the first scene. So you've got to kind of weigh up which one.
It's a balancing act, isn't it?
Exactly. So personally, I would have preferred to have seen Barrymore there, because I would have liked to have seen more her carry the film rather than just have that short sequence at the start. And I think Campbell probably could have done a decent job with that short sequence if she had managed to nail that 15 minutes worth of performance. She was probably capable of doing that. But again, in summary, I think she does well.
Yeah, good points. Well, with Drew Barrymore out of the picture as Sydney, other actresses were considered along with Neve Campbell. Alicia Witt, Brittany Murphy, Melissa Joan Hart, Tori Spellin, and Reese Witherspoon were all in the frame. Molly Ringwald was Kevin Williamson's top choice, but because she thought at 27 she was too old to be in high school. I can't believe she was only 27 in 1996, man.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought she would have been in her 30s.
I did, yeah. Alicia Witt, Brittany Murphy and Campbell were down to the final three, but Craven had seen Neve Campbell in TV show Party of Five and thought she could play the innocence of Sydney well. And she had also been in The Craft, which came out around 7 months prior to Scream, so she did have a bit of pedigree in movies as well.
Yeah.
Next up is Courtney Cox as ruthless, cheesy journalist Gail Weathers. Matt, what do you think about Cox as Weathers?
I imagine, like a lot of people, I only knew Courtney Cox from Friends before this.
Yeah.
And I really don't like Friends. And the episodes I had seen of it before this, I thought she was easily the most irritating character in it. So I was not looking forward to her being in this film in a major role at all. And yeah, I really enjoy her performance, actually. I think she's really good as Gail. And what I like about it is how well she plays up the bitch element. There's not like a single trace of the kooky sitcom character that I was worried I was going to be watching for,
definitely
100 minutes or however long. Instead, she's just this purely selfish person, completely motivated by fame and headlines and book deals, who'll trample over anyone to get what she wants. And Cox is surprisingly great at putting that all on screen.
Yeah.
And what's more, despite how unlikable, she's not afraid to make Gail Weathers. I'm always really glad that she's still alive at the end of the film. I'm glad that she makes it through. Yeah. And I think that's all down to Courtney Cox's performance, which is pretty clever, really. And I think she deserves a lot of plaudits for it, particularly when she's going around in that like fluorescent lime green outfit.
Yeah, it's outrageous, that, isn't it? So 90s. I like that the character pretty much stopped at nothing to get a scoop, like you said, Matt. She doesn't give a fuck who she stomps on along the way. Yeah. She even pushes Sydney to the point of physical violence when she clocks her one outside the police station. Mm-hmm. Her relationship with Dewey seems unbelievable to me, and I suppose that's a reflection of the character. She'll even play with somebody's emotions to get the story, potentially. Yeah. Weird when she tells Dewey that he doesn't look a day over 12 except in the upper torso area. Really weird line, that. Don't like that. Of course, you don't look a day over 12. Why are you saying that?
Yeah. Why 12?
I think it was a really risky move to cast Courtney Cox in this role. She'd been known for like her goody two-shoes roles in things like Masters of the Universe. She's in Cocoon The Return. I'd seen both of those before this. And at this point, she was 2 seasons into Friends, so she was a big name in the cast. Probably the biggest. I know that Drew Barrymore's in there, but she hadn't done anything too much. Poison Ivy in the early 90s, forget about it. Courtney Cox had heard about the role of Gale Weathers, and she wrote Wes Craven a letter explaining that playing a bitch wouldn't be a stretch because she'd played calculated characters in the past. And like you, Matt, I don't see Monica from Friends in this. I do see Gale Weathers, and I do believe her heartless bitch thing. Yeah. And I also, tapping into what you were saying, Matt, about glad to see that she's still there at the end. I think she's got some of the funniest lines in the film.
Oh, yeah, she's really funny. She's really funny.
When she calls Stu and Billy dipshits at the end is very funny. Stumbles on you two dipshits. Great. And when she does finally put a bullet into Billy, she says, I remember the safety that time, you bastard. Great.
Yeah.
I love it. What do you think, Courtney Cox, PI?
Yeah, she does play it with this real degree of arrogance. She does come across, for the most part, as a complete bitch. I think you're able to kind of really buy into that aspect of the storyline with Sydney, her mother's murder, and then you've got Gail, who's like this really self-absorbed reporter looking for her scoop, not bothered if she really pisses Sydney off. Cox plays that well. And like you have both said, I think she's great towards the end when she also becomes one of the ones who's being hunted. You get kind of a sense of threat there. She has, I kind of agree with Matt, almost managed to win the audience over, I think. We don't want to see her buy it, and we think for a second that she's going to save the day. And perhaps she's going to help Sydney out. She does play the role well. For me, it does help that Cox is easy on the eyes. She's a good-looking woman.
She is. Handsome woman.
She certainly was in those days. I think she's a great fit for the character. I think she was well cast. Like as I was saying, she's one of the reasons for me why the film works.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. 3 in agreement.
We all love Cox.
Yes, we do. You can quote that. Put that on the poster.
Yeah.
We all love Cox. All the right movies. Prior to Cox being on board, Janine Garofalo and Brooke Shields were considered. Elizabeth Berkley went into audition, but was immediately shown the door because of her part in Paul Verhoeven's Smutfest Showgirls. Get out. An abomination. During production, Cox would often go to Craven for direction, a director with 25 years experience, specifically in the genre. And he would say things like, Courtney, what do you think? I've been here before. I don't know what it feels like to be chased by a madman with a knife. Just do what you think.
Great direction, though.
Yeah.
You make me so sick. Your entire havoc-inducing, thieving, whoring generation disgusts me.
As I said, there's a big cast of memorable performers. So out of the supporting cast, fellas, who's your favourite PI?
I'm going to go for the unfortunately named Randy. Thinking back now, I mean, I didn't pick it up at the time, obviously, but it feels as if it's almost like he's like a young Quentin Tarantino. Like this movie geek, the one who's got the knowledge, the one who works in the video store, the one that almost would know that he's inside of a film, I guess. A kind of self-awareness. I do like his dialogue. I like his dialogue in the way that it's done in terms of the exposition, kind of filling in a way that we know how the film's going to pan out, almost, or how a horror movie should pan out. I really enjoy the scene, which, we'll talk about later, but where he's massively under threat and the way that it's worked in with the kind of time delay. That's great. I think Jamie Kennedy does play it well with that real kind of comedic Again, tongue-in-cheek style that works really, really well with the tone. For me, he is a really memorable character within the Scream universe. He always springs to mind for some reason as soon as I think of the film.
Yeah. What about you, Matt?
I've got to talk about David Arquette, I think, is Dewey. You've got to get Dewey in there, haven't you? Because I know originally he went up for Billy Loomis at first, didn't he? But he thought he was too old, so he asked if he could read for Dewey instead, which did surprise Wes Craven, because Craven's original conception was that Dewey was going to be quite a stereotypical, hunky, but slightly dim cop, whereas Arquette, he's obviously not that kind of build. He's much more slender, but I think that's a genius of the character, really, because it completely undercuts that conception of what you think the cop is going to be like, and making Dewey quite slow-witted. He's not the sharpest tool in the box by a long stretch. I love that scene where him and Gail have left the house and they're walking to find the car, and he points up at the sky, says to Gail, "Oh, do you know what that constellation's called?" And she goes, "No, what?" He's like, "Oh, I don't know, I thought you could tell me."
Totally inept.
Totally inept.
I thought you were going to tell us what it was.
Really funny line. Really funny line. But I think Arquette's just got this real sweetness to him, and it just makes Dewey inherently likable. But the really great thing about him is that despite all these flaws, despite how, like I say, easily scared he is, how inept he is in most ways, he's still really brave. In all 5 films, he's always putting himself in danger for everyone else. Yeah. He's always ready to step forward, takes the lead, even when he's scared deep down. So I think if they'd gone for that original type of casting they had in mind, someone like, obviously not this fella because he would have been far too young, but like a Channing Tatum type, I don't think the character Dewey would work half as well. I think Arquette in this, it's probably my favourite performance in the film.
Fantastic, well said. Well, as you two have taken, obviously, the 2 best supporting characters, I'm going to talk about Stu.
Oh.
He's not necessarily my favourite. I mean, he does skirt the line of annoying sometimes.
Skirt? Vaults over it.
Leave her alone. Was a joke, leave her alone.
And he dials it right up at the end.
Yeah.
But his performance does stand out. He, along with Randy, I suppose, are the comic relief. But in a nice twist, the comic relief turns out to be the killer or one of the killers, which I like.
Yeah.
He was only in the running for the film by accident. He was with his then girlfriend who was going to an audition for something else, and he was spotted by a casting director and approached to audition. However, he auditioned for the part of Billy, but was told, "You're not the right guy to make out with Nev Campbell. So why don't you come back for the best friend instead?" Really rude. Especially considering Liliarda and Campbell were a couple for a couple of years as well.
All right.
Really?
And he got the part because of his, quotes, incredible ferocity.
Right, okay.
And that wasn't the only couple to form a relationship on set. Obviously, Arquette and Cox met on Scream and later married and later divorced, of course. Wes Craven played matchmaker in that. Arquette said, "He gave me a real man-to-man talk, and that had an impact on the course of my life. He was like, 'David, you know she likes you, and you should really get your shit together.'" He can't direct horror scenes, but he can direct Arquette into Cox's arms. And just a couple of interesting notes on Skeet Ulrich, who plays Billy. I mentioned there were a couple of times that the stuntman didn't don the Ghostface costume, one being Craven at the start, the other is Skeet Ulrich. Real name, Brian Ray Trout.
Oh, I understand that, yeah. I understand the change, yeah.
At the end, when Randy's drunk by himself watching Halloween and saying, behind you, that's Skeet Ulrich playing the part of Ghostface.
Right.
Okay.
And he got the part because he reminded Wes Craven of Johnny Depp, who he put in Elm Street 12 years beforehand.
Really does, yeah.
Yeah, he looks just like him. Yeah. And Billy's name is a nod to Donald Pleasance's character in Halloween. He's Billy Loomis. Pleasance is Sam Loomis. His name from Halloween is a nod to the character from Psycho, Sam Loomis. So it's a nice continuation of the name. I like it.
It is.
So keeping in the horror tradition, Scream has a largely unknown cast, with a few familiar names from TV in there for good measure, all of which put in stellar performances.
Yeah.
This episode of All the Right Movies is sponsored by Just Watch, the ultimate movie and TV show streaming guide. Just Watch recommends movies based on your preferences, keeping track of what you watched, what you liked and what you didn't, to serve up the best movies and shows on your streaming services. Simply install the app on your Android or iOS device, choose your favourite streaming services, and the app will tell you what's available and where to watch it. It's a great way to consolidate all of your streaming services into one easy-to-navigate app. I've recently used it to search for the 1980 horror classic Mother's Day and found it on Shudder just like that. Perfect. With the Just Watch app, you can check out new releases of movies and shows, and it's updated daily. So whether it's the new Netflix movie that everybody's talking about or a huge Amazon Prime TV show that you can't get enough of, you'll find it on Just Watch. The app has loads of great features, including the watch list, which lets you save new movies and shows to watch in the future. And also, if you've heard about an interesting movie or show, you can check out the popular feed to find out more and where you can watch it 100% legally. So what are you waiting for? Get the ultimate streaming guide. Install Just Watch app on your iOS or Android device today, and you can click the link in the podcast description of this show to download the app now. This episode of All the Right Movies is also sponsored by BetterHelp. Without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is very hard, but the good news is therapy works. But what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now or would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships or at work, not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles and start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers phone, video, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. Join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are your greatest asset. And a special offer to All the Right Movies listeners, you can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/ATRM. That's betterhelp, HELP.com/ATRM. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast.
The middle.
Before the second act, Sydney clocks Gail when she gets in her face outside the police station. She has a sleepover at Tatum's, but is tormented again by Ghostface, throwing Billy's guilt into question. We're now talking about the sequence at school, which ends with Sydney being attacked again. P.I., you want to take this away?
I really like the little conversation that we get between Sydney and Gail outside of the school, by the news van. Love the way Sydney approaches Gail, and Gail's all defensive because obviously she's been hit her with a sucker punch previously.
Yeah.
Never allowed to touch her face. Gorgeous dish. As soon as Sydney wants to chat, she wants to get the camera out. She wants to get it on record. It's a little bit on the nose the way that she's kind of this cutthroat reporter. I think that it goes along with the character, and a lot of the characters are fairly obvious at times, but I don't mind it so much. I mean, especially here, it's very obvious. You get the whole backstory here with Sydney's mother's murder being called into question, and this is the aspect I really like. That seed of doubt being planted in Sydney's mind as well as ours with regards to the death, and then how that then links in with the story and the revelations with kind of Billy and Stu much later on. I think there's some decent dialogue here as well, which I've always liked. I liked where Tatum approaches the two of them and she tries to antagonize Gail and she says, "Nice welt, sweetie."
Yeah, great.
And then again, it's like Sydney and Tatum leave and Sydney says to Gail, "I'm sorry I mangled your face." I love that, But better still how Gail is just completely unfazed by either of those insults. Like, she'll take the insults if it means that she can get the story.
Yeah.
And it's actually quite funny that what comes as that is absolutely how over the moon she is, that there's a potential that there's another killer on the loose. She loves that idea.
Yeah.
What it can do for her book sales.
Yeah, great.
She is a fairly unsavory character. But I just love the way that that snippet of information works its way later on into the storyline. I think it's great.
Yeah, I agree. And just before this as well, a nice uncredited appearance by Linda Blair as the loudmouth reporter in the opening of the scene.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Following this thought, I think we need to talk about Himbry a bit.
Yes.
Principal Himbry, Henry Winkler, the Fonz, get him in there.
I love him.
Hey! Remember, your principal loves you.
Well, exactly. I mean, I'm getting to that, but before that, you've got the scene when Sid comes into his office to talk to the sheriff and Huey, and he just starts holding her chin and stroking
Really
it slightly, staring deeply into her eyes. Don't touch the students like that. And it's as PI says, over the tannoy, remember, your principal loves you. Again, obviously, very, very weird. Don't see that type of thing.
You know what's quite good about that aspect is there's a shot of the main police guy, but he sees the principal touch her, and it like casts another seed of doubt. It's almost like he's saying, "Why is he touching her? Could he potentially be the killer?"
Pretty good.
Yeah,
because also he's obviously clued in what happened with Sydney's mother as well. He brings that up as well. So yeah, weird man, a bit of a red herring, a bit of a suspect, but I do love it when he catches those two students running around in the Ghostface costume. That scene in the office, great sound effects. The way he's whipping those scissors around,
great.
Genuinely feels like he's gonna like take their eyes out at one point. And I love his dialogue here. It's great. Your entire thieving, whoring generation disgusts me. Why are you a teacher then? Yeah. It sounds like you're in the wrong job. You know, hang you from a tree so it can expose you for the heartless, desensitized little shits that you are. Great stuff. But I think there's some really nice foreshadowing in the scene as well going on, because Craven is like explicitly asking us, why are you assuming there's only one killer? Because there's two kids running around in this costume.
Yeah,
and
great.
It's so clever because it took so many viewings for that to click. He's given us the first inkling. Why are you assuming there's only one of these, maniacs running around this costume? You already know, Dewey said earlier on, you can get this costume anywhere. And he's shown us here there could be two, and we don't really pick up. And I think that's really, really clever. I'd even go as far as saying when he takes the costumes off them, one of them looks like Billy because he's got the curtains, and the other one looks a bit like Stu because he's just got the short, scruffy ass. Yeah, it's a really clever scene. But Henry, a very weird man.
Brandishing those scissors about the place, running them down one of the students' chests. What the fuck are you doing? Great. I want to talk about the toilet attack on Sydney.
Brilliant.
The conversation that these two girls are having confirms that everybody seems to know about Sydney's mother's reputation, but her. She's the only one in the dark, or she doesn't want to believe it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe she didn't want to come to terms with it, but this, along with the conversation outside with Weathers, is kind of making the penny drop for her. But what I really like here is the tension that's built. Then there's that reveal that there's somebody been there all along, listening to the conversation, peering in on her emotions. And I like that like nowhere is off limits. The comfort of home or school mean nothing here.
Yeah.
But for me, this has always felt quite dreamlike, maybe a figment of Sydney's messed up imagination. You mentioned about the fantastical nature of Elm Street, Matt, and this one's more grounded. But this certainly feels as though it could come out of Nightmare on Elm Street. Because at the start, when one of the girls in the stall, she says, Sydney was never attacked. I think she made all of that up. For a second or two, this feels like a voice in Sydney's head. That is until these girls come out and start sassing all over the place.
Yeah.
And then when they leave, there's this ghostly whisper of Sydney's name.
Yeah.
And then the Ghostface attack, how did he get in there? Nobody sees him before or after. It just seems far too risky for Stu to put, or Billy, to put themselves in this position. Yeah. So this has always felt like we're seeing this scene play out in Sydney's mind a little bit for me. A call back to Elm Street.
Yeah, definitely.
Great show.
Definitely get that vibe from it.
Yeah. The school in question was originally supposed to be Santa Rosa High School in Santa Rosa, obviously. But the school board changed their mind because they felt that the film glorified violence. Specifically the scene where Sydney and her pals are outside the school and Randy's throwing the accusations around left and right.
Oh, yeah.
But ironically, a member of the school board, the same school board who rejected the film, was later arrested for beating up his wife, which Craven took some twisted pleasure from.
I bet.
So production moved to a community centre in nearby Sonoma, and in the special thanks section at the end of the credits, right at the end, a note reads, "No thanks whatsoever to Santa Rosa City School District Governing Board."
Oh, really?
You. Yeah.
I'll have to watch right
really
here next time.
Yeah.
Really bitchy.
Yeah. Just know you can't just come around and just think you can go to any old school you want to.
I know.
We've got a right to say no. I know. So after Sydney's attack, Principal Himbry calls a curfew, which becomes his undoing. We're looking at the sequence that starts with his untimely demise and ends with Randy, Stu, and Billy at the video store.
Yeah.
And I'm starting the conversation with the attack on Principal Himbry.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot go wrong with Henry Winkler. I absolutely love him in anything that he pops up. But he's awesome here.
He is.
It's funny when he's wearing the mask and he's having some fun with it and he takes it off and scares himself in the mirror. Still got time to cool enough to do his hair and like Fonzie. Great. And if you look close enough, you'll see that Winkler's Fonzie leather jacket is hanging up in that closet when he opens the closet doors.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
Lovely.
Class.
But there's some great tension being built here with the knocks on the door and the camera lurking around as he's searching in the office. But for some reason, there's this insane moment where Wes Craven plays the janitor called Fred with a Freddy Krueger sweater on. I just don't get why this reference is so overt.
It is.
I mean, the film hasn't been the most subtle so far. It wears its knowledge of slasher films like a badge of honor, but this takes everything to a whole new level.
Yeah.
I just don't like it.
Yeah.
But what I do like is the moment where the door shuts and Himbry's attacked. Winkler sells the shit out of his pain. And then there's that awesome shot into his eye where we can see the reflected ghost face mask.
Fantastic.
One of the best shots in the film. It's a fantastic shot. Love it.
Yeah.
Himbry gets whacked out here because Bob Weinstein felt that 30 pages without a murder was too long. It wasn't in the original script.
Oh, really? Okay.
Firstly, totally agree with you, Luke. I really like that cut from I guess it's the sound of school's out for the summer. We get the reflection in the principal's eye of the killer. Then that transitions into the sound system playing the song from the bedroom window of the house. Love the way they do that. I think that's
very
great.
nice.
And what follows is, too, the discussion that the two girls have. Again, I really like the aspect where we're calling further into question, following from the two scenes prior, where the mother's death has brought up Sydney's concerns that go along with that. You can see, again, she's getting really defensive about the whole thing. She's questioning the whole thing in her mind, understandably. But I can remember thinking back to the first time that I saw this, and in particular, in this scene, you're sort of thinking, the whole thing's not right. I mean, everything's getting drawn into question now, and that's definitely further reinforced with those amazing killer POV shots.
Oh, they're great, aren't they?
Total Halloween, but just the way that it's used with that dialogue, with Sydney's state of mind, I think it just works. It's really unsettling. It's intentionally that way, but I think it works great. Just something's bubbling under the surface that you're unsure about, but that it's just like you want to know more. I really like that idea.
Yeah.
That subliminal kind of tension building, and obviously then we get. I love that quick zoom into the bushes, where we see the kind of that image of Ghostface darting off to some unknown location. He's been watching them all along. Just love the way that the kind of jigsaw pieces come together in this scene, and everything's kind of just up in the air. It's great.
Yeah, I agree. Those two elements that you mentioned there, two of my favourites in any horror film. The killer POV, it's used loads in Friday the 13th, but also something in the background that the people in the foreground don't know about, but we're privy to. And sometimes it's a blink and they'll miss it kind of thing. I love that. I can't get enough of it. Done well here.
Great.
Really well.
Builds up, though, doesn't it, to one of my favourite bits in the film, which is when they're in the video store and Randy starts laying out his theories to Stu about who it could be, why it might be Billy, why it might be the dad. Because it's one of those scenes that just has that really great mixture of self-awareness. So you've got the bit where the woman comes up to Randy and asks, what's the werewolf film with E.T.'s mom in it? Which is obviously the nod to Drew Barrymore earlier on.
Yeah,
That's
great.
nice. But it's blended in with a lot of humour. It always makes me laugh when Randy says, there's all some stupid bullshit reason to kill your girlfriend. And there's a woman stood behind him in a different order, just gives him this really horrible look of disgust and just walks off. I mean, she's a bit out of focus, but you can still tell. She's like really, really like disgusted by him. That's really funny. But that line about killing your girlfriend for some like stupid reason, again, nice foreshadowing going on there, because that's what Stu does to Tatum. Stu sets Tatum up to be killed. And it's never really explained why he does it. He just does. And you also get that line where Randy says Sid's father is going to pop up in the last reel, which he does. So nice foreshadowing going on. But I think the most creepy and most effective thing about this dialogue between them is Stu is asking Randy to explain his theories because he wants to know, are there any flaws in the plan? Is there anything that he and Billy have overlooked? Is Randy close to figuring out the truth? And I think watching that scene in that way gives it a really interesting spin once you realise what Stu is doing. Because he wants to know, is there anything they haven't thought of? And if so, Randy is the best person to ask, but he's got to be asked in a very specific way. And I think it's really clever writing to get that into this dialogue between the two of them. And I think Kennedy's great here, especially when he just starts losing his shit and starts ranting on about a very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect. Really funny.
Great,
He is
great point.
He is really funny. Like,
He is. I like that he's berating the police for not doing their job right, and he says if they watch Prom Night, they'd save time. Like they're gonna do that police training Prom Night. I love that Randy's banging on about all these crap horror films, and nobody is listening. Nobody gives a shit. He's dismissed by the characters and in the audience, I guess, but he's dead right. He predicts 2 killers during the film, and this kind of goes unnoticed. He accuses Stu at the start and Billy here in the video shop. The father's a red herring, it's Billy. He identifies them straight away, and nobody's listening. So as everybody's a suspect and school's out, it's all round to Stu's for a party.
The crew.
Adding to the talent that we've already talked about on Scream, it's got a killer screenplay written by Kevin Williamson. P.I., what do you think of Kevin Williamson's writing in the film?
the writing's fantastic.
Yep.
Feels like a really original piece of work. Certainly did back in the the late 90s. I can remember people really being drawn in, myself included, with the kind of real kind of self-awareness aspect in the dialogue. It feels as if the film knows it's a film. I think when you watch it again, all those references that we're talking about, especially coming from Jamie Kennedy's character, Randy, references to the other horror movies to which it's now being compared.
Yeah, exactly.
The characters who fit in so well with the horror tropes, the knowledge being passed on, like I say, from scene by scene by Randy, and then all the other characters talking about the different murders that are going on, the explanation of the rules of horror movies, of horror tropes, all just works in so well together. And I just like how at the time, I remember thinking it felt just fresh, it felt clever, it felt really original at the time, and it's been copied and it's been mimicked so many times now that it's easy just to kind of be so blasé with how much impact this film did have, but it really did, and obviously a lot of it is real testament to a lot of the ideas and aspects that are brought about as a result of Kevin Williamson's work. I also thought that for a horror movie, it does well in trying to have that plot twist in at the end. Like you said before, Luke, it really is a whodunit. But you also mentioned something about the Friday the 13th aspect, which I've just thought about there. But, the clever reference you talked in the first scene, which is that little nugget of information which dropped in, which is saying the mother was the actual murderer. I like that there. It's just kind of like, I think that's fantastic in the writing where we learn that it's the killer who's telling you, actually, there's a bit of a plot twist which is going to be coming at the end. It's not going to be the person who you think it is. And so in the end, that's the way that it transpires in this one as well. I like that little nugget that's dropped in. And of course, that's all in the writing. And there's loads of different kind of examples of that which work throughout in this film. Matt's mentioned a couple already. So that's obviously massive testament to the writing, and it's really strong. Yeah,
I agree. I mean, it can't be stated how much of an impact the film had, specifically the writing. This kind of meta reference-laden film was certainly not commonplace in mainstream movies. I'm certain that Tarantino and the way he writes dialogue did have a big influence on Kevin Williamson. Yeah. I also think that Craven's New Nightmare, which is meta-heavy, must have had another influence as well. But up to this point, horror movies just didn't reference other films in the genre. And I think a character like Randy should just not exist in horror films, or certainly didn't beforehand. He's the one telling the characters and the audience what's supposed to happen in these films. But in horror films that had gone before, there's this kind of unwritten rule that the characters are supposed to be stupid and do things where the audience is screaming at the screen for them not to do. Yeah. And it completely spun the genre and the conventions within that genre on its head. It is a total game changer. It's a really important screenplay. And I think most of the beats are really well written. I like the scene near the start where Billy sneaks into Sid's room. There's references to horror films left and right, like Elm Street and The Exorcist. Good introduction to the two characters, getting the audience off the scent of Billy as the killer because he was here, but he only goes to Sydney's to give himself an alibi. And that scene's important for a number of reasons, and I think it does them very well. And that's just one example. But I do have a couple of niggles with the writing. Just a little bit. Okay. I'll never understand that beat where Randy gets a call that Principal Himbree's dead and hanging in the football field. Who's calling him to explain this and why? I don't quite get it. I think the story needs to get rid of the rest of the people in the house. Yeah. and that's where they tear off to cut him
Conveniently,
down.
isn't it?
Very
Yeah.
convenient, just bizarre. I just don't think that moment is very well written. I don't get it.
I've always assumed it's either Billy or Stu, and they're hoping that the rest of them, he knows them, or they both know them. They're hoping that as a result, they're going to do what they end up doing, which is he was thinking that they would all dash off.
Just to get them out,
presumably.
right? Yeah, potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, potentially.
But I mean, it's, you know,
Yeah, it's a stretch.
you're clutching at straws.
Yeah.
It really is a stretch to assume for that to be the assumption.
And I think the dialogue's fantastic, obviously, but there is, I think, Billy's dialogue, some of Billy's dialogue's not fantastic.
Yeah.
Like when he says to Sid, it's like near the end, just before they have sex, it's like Jodie Foster in Silence of the Lambs when she's having flashbacks of her dead father. Sid says, "This isn't a movie." And he says, "Sure it is. It's all a movie. It's all one great big movie, only you can't pick a genre." Crap dialogue that. I don't know what he's talking about. That's really shit. Really shit. But it really rewards on repeat viewings, like we've talked about, when you know there are two killers trying to work out which of Stu and Billy committed which kill is always a lot of fun.
Yeah, very much in agreement. It's excellent stuff. And I know he got the idea when he was sat at home one evening, and he was watching a TV special about a Florida serial killer when he noticed that a window was open in his house, but he couldn't remember opening it himself. So he grabbed a knife to go and investigate, called a friend for support while he searched his house. And when he was on the phone to his friend, they started talking about horror movies. And that's where Williamson got the idea that he wanted to write a horror movie and where this kind of opening sequence came from.
Amazing.
Nice.
But it's very much what you two guys are saying. That there's two elements of this writing that stand out, really. The first one is that self-awareness of it. You know, characters knowing that they're in a horror movie scenario because they've seen horror movies. And it can't be emphasized enough how refreshing and smart that was at the time. And what's really clever is that could have completely destroyed the film, because really Scream wants to have its cake and eat it, because it wants to acknowledge that you're watching a horror movie that abides by horror movie rules, but it also wants to feel like it's occurring in the real world, and it somehow manages to do that as well. It still maintains the believability of what's happening while it's commenting on what's happening, which that is such a tightrope to walk in terms of the writing without calling attention to itself too much. In those terms, though, that's where there are, like you, Luke, there's a few flaws for me, and it is the dialogue, and it does seem to be Billy again. Like the scene where he crawls into Sid's bedroom and he starts talking about how their relationship started off as PG-13, and it's like the cut version of The Exorcist. That's really clunky. That's really cringy now.
Yeah.
Probably was quite clever at the time, but I don't think that's aged well. But the other aspect, and we've all mentioned it, it's the whodunit aspect of it. And I think that gets overlooked, because that revelation, there's two killers at the same time working in tandem, mind blown. You know,
Nobody was expecting that.
Nobody was expecting that. And it's such a clever twist, because they've got alibis and everyone seems really obvious at different times. That's all brilliantly done. It just keeps you second guessing. So yeah, even now you can see why the script was such the hot property that it was.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Just going back to Billy, I don't buy his film knowledge. Anthony Perkins, Psycho, just like corn syrup, just like they use for pig's blood in Carrie. I don't buy that he knows that.
Yeah. That's the stuff that doesn't age particularly well.
No, I agree. You mentioned about the story, Williamson writing the screenplay. He wrote the first draft of the script and a treatment for 2 sequels over the next 3 days after that encounter. And the script generated a lot of heat in Hollywood, which sparked a bidding war between Paramount, Universal, Morgan Creek, Oliver Stone's Synergy Pictures, and the Weinstein's Dimension Films. Williamson ultimately went with Dimension, who paid $400,000 for the screenplay, less than some of the other companies offered, but he thought that the film had more chance of being made.
Yeah.
It actually came to Dimension as a spec script, which is an unsolicited script not commissioned by a company. Very rare these days, but it kind of happened a lot in the 90s. Richard Potter was an exec there and was told by Bob Weinstein that if he ever comes across a script that blows him away, to contact him immediately. And he called Weinstein. He said, if you don't want to make this, then I've got no idea what you're looking for. Confident.
Yeah.
The original title, I think it's fairly well known now, but the original title of the film was Scary Movie. The name change came from Harvey and Bob Weinstein, who didn't like it, and they suggested Scream, having just seen the music video for Michael and Janet Jackson's duet of the same name. It's a fair point, really, because, I mean, Scream, it is iconic now.
Yeah,
and Scary Movie
much
makes
better
it too self-referential and meta,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
And we wouldn't have gotten that outstanding spoof series of 6 crap comedy
Well,
films.
exactly. How could we live
Well, that
without
would have been
that?
called Scream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Moving over to the music in the film, there's your standard 90s tracks with a few standouts and a haunting score by Marco Beltrami. And I'm going to kick us off here, and I'm not a fan of the pop music in there, really.
No.
Really kind of generic standard stuff for a high school-based film in the 90s. But there are 2 standouts for me, and one is Don't Fear the Reaper, which is playing when Billy and Sydney are getting up to some on top of the closed noughties in that scene near the start that I talked about. I think there's nice foreshadowing there of what's to come. Don't Fear the Reaper, it's
Yes,
Billy.
Don't Fear the Reaper, yeah.
Also a reference to the original song, which plays in the original Halloween, although this version is not by Blue Oyster Cult. It is by that very well-known band, Gus. Simply Gus.
Lovely.
I think the most obvious talking point is Red Right Hand by Nick Cave.
Yeah.
And it plays out in full when the town is shutting down and the curfew, and I think it matches the visuals perfectly. That and the dialogue when Sydney says it's like the town that dreaded sundown. Dewey says, I saw that movie, it was about a killer in Texas. And the music goes hand in hand with this for me and is a million times more chilling than the film that they're talking about. The Town That Dreaded Sundown is a very, very silly film if you haven't seen it.
I've
Don't
not seen that
bother.
one, to be honest.
Crap.
Is that why Dewey likes it?
Yeah. There was a remake or sequel, kind of, one and the other really, about 3-4 years ago, and that's much better.
Okay.
Right.
And as for the score, I really like it. I think there are cues that really stand out and heighten the tension. I love the moment where there's that rush in the score where Sydney opens the closet near the start when she's first attacked. And I can't get enough of how terrifying the sound is when the title comes in right at the start with the screams over the top of it.
Oh, yeah. That's
Love
great.
that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's music that accompanies Sid as she gets off the bus and walks to her house. That female vocal, that kind of thing. Kind of crops up a few times.
Beautiful, that, Luke.
Oh, thank you very much. I don't need to replace that with the audio from the film now then.
No, it's perfect.
You don't need to, but I advise
But
that you do.
It reminds me a similar kind of female vocal haunting in the Dirty Harry soundtrack that we talked about a couple of months
Absolutely,
back.
yeah.
Matt, what do you think of the music?
Original score is fine. I think it's kind of what you expect in a film like this. You know, big kind of stabbing synths, no pun intended, quite reminiscent of Halloween in places.
Yeah.
The pop music, like you, I'm not a fan. You know,
No.
Republica playing, it Stu's
Drop
party.
Dead Gorgeous. Awful.
Ooh, boy. Is it Drop Dead Gorgeous or Ready to Go? One or the other.
It's Drop Dead Gorgeous.
Drop Dead Gorgeous. I mean, they both
Yeah.
sound the same.
What's the
let's be
difference?
honest. Exactly. So it dated quite a bit. Red Right Hand, obviously amazing. But apart from that, there's not really much that sticks around in the memory for me.
Right. Okay. PI, what about you?
Well, it's three in agreement. I don't think I'm bothered at all by the vast majority of the pop music that's used in there. Most of it's totally forgettable. I normally think, you know, of something that I used to love film-wise when I was a teen. Did I consider or have I ever considered buying this as a soundtrack?
No shot.
Because I used to do regularly. Definitely not for this one. Never a consideration. I think the pop songs generally fit in with what those snotty little shitty teens were listening to back then. But that's certainly not my taste in music, and it certainly isn't now. I think, like I mentioned before, the one that I always remember was School's Out for Summer. But it's only in there briefly, really.
Yeah.
Totally agree with you, as though the score is great. There's some really subliminal sounds. It points to this kind of nicely creepy kind of air that it brings about, if that makes sense. I think for me, the opening scene is a prime example of that. The score works fantastically well. I think it being just this kind of getting under the surface and bringing this brutality to life of that opening scene.
Yeah.
Draws out the tension. In general, I think the score works really, really well. The pop songs, for the most part, are forgettable.
Yeah, agreed. 3 in agreement. This was Marco Beltrami's first movie score, and he got the gig after Wes Craven's assistant was on a web chat site and asked if there was any fresh musical talent around that people knew about.
Right.
Fortuitous. He'd never seen a horror film, didn't like the genre, so took inspiration from Ennio Morricone's work on the Dollars trilogy. And he claims that he scored the film like a Western, and it's quite orchestral, particularly in that opening scene that you talked about.
Yes, yeah.
When he sent over his demo tape, Craven said that all the others that he'd received sounded like John Williams, but Beltrami's felt original, so that's why he chose him.
Right, nice.
We're not going to go into detail about the cinematography work by Mark Irwin, but interestingly, with 1 week left of shooting, Craven insisted that Irwin sack and replace his entire team because he thought that the footage that they'd shot was out of focus. Irwin said, "I can't do that, you're going to have to fire me as well." So Craven did. Got rid of a lot of them. Called his bluff.
Bluff
I call
called.
his bluff direct. Absolutely, yeah.
Oh.
Get out. There's some great effects work in the film, editing by Patrick Lussier as well, but the film's got a great score and one of the most important screenplays of the decade.
Yeah.
The end.
With everything beginning to sound like a Wes Carpenter flick, Stu arranges a house party, which leads us to the elongated 43-minute third act of the film.
Yeah.
People get sliced and diced, with Dutch angles popping up all over the place. The first sequence that we're looking at starts with Tatum buying it in the cat flap and ends with Billy being sliced up in the bedroom. And Matt, I believe you're going to take it away.
I really like Tatum as a character, and I think it's a real shame that she gets taken out here.
Yeah.
And I know in her death scene, she improvised shouting at Mom just before she's killed to add some emotional heft to the scene. And Rose McGowan's also said people have asked her loads of times why she tried to escape through the dog flap door in the garage, and McGowan said, well, at the time, I was skinny enough that I could fit through it. And actually, they had to nail her shirt to the door to make it seem like it was a struggle for her to get through.
Yeah.
So it does actually make sense. But like you've said there, Luke, loads of Dutch angles in here, which are always good to see. And it's what we've said before. Ghostface is really clumsy, and I think this scene in particular really brings it home that he's not like an unstoppable zombie. He's not a paranormal killer like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees. He is actually, when he's getting like that fridge door in the face and then beer bottles to the groin, you can tell he's a human. You can tell he's getting hurt. And I think that's just a really clever touch to remind you of this in this film. And it makes it more interesting for me. And we've already mentioned it, but the fact that we're pretty sure it is Billy doing this killing, it makes it all the more disturbing that Stu purposely asked Tatum to go to the garage in the first place to get some beer, sending his girlfriend to her death. And again, we said it before, but for no reason now we can really work out other than he's obviously just a psychopath and he just wants to see you killed. And then you get that really nice little payoff when Billy hasn't been invited to the party, but he turns up anyway at the front porch. And you just get that little look between him and Stu. And I always think the look Billy gives Stu is as if it's to say, yeah, she's been taken care of, it's done. They just have that little moment going on between them. So, yeah, really sympathetic character. The fact that the killing gets quite drawn out makes it all the more horrible, but it's really, really memorable.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a great line just when Billy shows up. Sid says, if Tatum saw you here, she'd draw blood. She actually has. Very nice line.
Yeah.
What I want to talk about is the moment when they huddle around the TV watching Halloween.
Oh, yeah.
Stu wants to see Jimmy Lee's breasts, and he's not the only one, obviously. Not until Trading Places in 83. We've talked about Trading Places. We had a good laugh at it.
Yeah,
what I love about this is when I first watched the film, I knew what Randy was talking about. I knew this fact about Trading Places. I love Trading Places. And so I'm ashamed to say it, that Randy was me. I identified with him. Embarrassingly.
You were Randy.
I was Randy all the time. I find it very funny when one of the girls says she could have afforded a decent pair and Randy is disgusted. What did you say? And this moment where he gets up in full movie geek mode, lording it over everyone that he's the authority on. And he's astounded when he says, you don't know the rules, as if everybody should be taught in school like the alphabet. I'll be right back. I'll see you in the kitchen with a knife or whatever he says. Really like that. But I love the callback to that line in the next moment where Dewey takes Gail to see the abandoned car that's been reported in. And she says to Kenny, I'll be right back. So because of what Randy says, we're expecting her to get the chop. But this film is all about subverting the rules. So it's not Gail who dies, it's Kenny.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
Great moment.
Well, I love the bit that follows on from this that you've just talked about. The whole sequence after the drunken guests at the party of, like we mentioned before, really conveniently left to go and see the principal's body at the high school, and that leaves Randy alone. And all of this happens while that the Halloween tune plays diegetically from the TV.
Yeah.
I really, really love that. It's a really clever way to utilize like an amazing horror score without feeling as if they've just kind of totally pinched it. It just
Great.
works so well with kind of the way that Randy's dialogue. Following that, I like the funny scene with Dewey and Gale where they fall into the bushes and he makes a fool of himself by being an absolute drip, and he has a kiss with her. He's saying, "Oh, he's all my life." Sort of
Yeah,
thing.
is that what you've been looking for?
and then he makes this massive, or they both make this massive deal about spotting a car, which is, as transpires, like 6 foot away from where they both landed.
Yeah.
Like they both look over and move about 2 steps, and the car is there. And you're thinking, like, how did they not spot that like immediately? How does Dewey not spot that like out the corner of his eye? That's always cracked us up. How outrageous this film is at times. Like it is totally tongue in cheek. It's almost like they've set it up so that you're going, how wouldn't have noticed the car? And they're saying, I know, but he's like Craven sort of saying, I know, but that's what happens in horror films. We're taking the piss out of it almost, But the bit I like is when we move back into the bedroom and Sydney's starting to quiz Billy about the phone call. And I just like how creepy Billy gets because, he's clearly a suspect with the way that the scene turns. He gets really defensive about the accusation. And then, boom, we get another curveball because Sydney actually sees Ghostface in the background. And then that's Billy getting slashed up, or so we think. So I love that kind of little plot twists, the way that it spins you one way and takes you back the other. This total elaborate plan, really, just perfectly falling into place in this scene for the sake of plotting, essentially. But Sydney just so happens to query Billy right before that he turns creepy, and then just before Stu comes in to give you the curveball. So the way that kind of falls into place is really convenient again. But I suppose that just kind of adds to it for me. I suppose.
Yeah.
I still like it. I still like that it's quite crafty. The writing's still good. It's trying to throw the audience off whenever it can.
Yeah, and it does a good job of doing it. There is a subtle moment where Billy glances to see if the door's open to make sure that the coast is clear for Stu to come in.
Yeah.
Very good.
And you know how they're watching Halloween as well?
Yes.
Do you think that's then referenced after Billy has killed Tatum? He kind of cocks his head to the side to look at her when she's basically jammed up.
Brilliant.
Like Michael Myers does when he
Like
pins
Myers
the guy.
does, yes.
Yeah.
The guy in the kitchen, he cocks his head to the side.
Yeah, I'd never even thought of that, man. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a reference there.
I mean, this scene is huge. Like I said, it's 43 minutes in total from them getting there to the credits roll in 43 minutes. So we have split it into 2. And it took 21 successive nights to shoot. The cast and crew called it the longest night in horror history and had T-shirts made up that read, "I survived scene 118." Crew do that all the time, don't they?
Yeah.
They always do that. Yeah, they do.
I survived this, that, and the other. You only made a film, man.
And no, it's not funny. But the house where it was shot was available because the couple that owned it had recently died within a month of each other, and for some reason their children had no interest in it. I think there was some family beef, so they were open to it being rented out. And I mean, how fortuitous to get this amazing, perfect set. And there's a moment where Billy goes upstairs with Sydney and Randy saying, "There goes my chance with Sid, blah, blah, blah." Yeah. And he calls Stu Alicia. And I never knew what the reference was. And it's a reference to Alicia Silverstone's character in Clueless, who says "as if" in that film. That's kind of her catchphase.
Right.
Always
Okay.
bothered us that. Always bothered us.
Yeah, I've never understood it either. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, cool.
She said everybody dies but us. Everybody dies but us. We're gonna carry on and plan the sequel, because let's face it, baby, these days, you gotta have a sequel.
So with Billy out of the picture, Ghostface chases Sid and throws her out the window. Randy has a narrow escape. Kenny's throat is slit. Gail crashes the van into the woods and Dewey is knifed in the back. We're looking at the final sequence where we finally find out who the killer is, killers are, or however you want to say it.
Yeah.
PI, you want to take this away?
Yeah. So I really enjoy the moment where Sydney locks both Randy and Stu out of the house. We're in confusion. She's in confusion. Who's involved? Who isn't? Who can we trust on Sydney's behalf, I suppose? Everyone's a suspect, like I'm saying. And then here's Billy all of a sudden emerges at the top of the stairs, slashed up but still alive, completely diverts our attention. we're being distracted with Stu and Randy. I just love the way that works. It's clever. Yeah. Again, it's clever. The way that it all falls into place with Billy, which transpires. I mean, he does that ridiculous, dramatic fall and roll down the stairs, and then they're like, as he lands at the bottom. But I think I always noticed from, and presumably it's intentional, because it has to be. It has to be. The makeup job looks rubbish. And it doesn't look as if he's been, in terrible shape, as if he's been cut up. Of course, he hasn't been at all. But the clues are there, which is really clever, which I really like. If you watch closely, you can, even on first view, and pick it up. And you don't really normally see that with horror movies or any film in particular. You normally watch back and think, all right, okay, there's the clue, there's the sign. I didn't see it first time, though. Yeah. Whereas I'm pretty sure first time he fell down those stairs, I went... there's nothing wrong with him. Like, I'm pretty sure I picked up on straight away. And so Billy manages to get the gun off Sydney. He has her fooled, and I think it's just great, that dramatic flip which just comes when Randy gets allowed in the house. He's screaming about Stu again. He's flapping his arms about. He's like totally just like going off it, and we're automatically just drawn to assume that Stu is the murderer. He must be, because Randy's, Randy's freaking out, and Randy's such a drip. It's never going to be him. He's never going to go and murder anyone. And then we get that close up of Billy's face, just looking deranged, and bang, Randy gets shot, and he does it's like a huge sound effect and a massive smash as he goes over that table. I've always loved that. It's a huge fall.
Yeah, it's a great fall.
It's a great fall followed by the really comedic moan. It always makes us chuckle, that moan that Jamie Kennedy lets out there. The last bit that I really like, not necessarily the Psycho reference, but I like the way that Billy scratches his head with the gun. I really like that. I really like that move.
Yeah, nice touch. I think it's hilarious just at the start of this when Sydney's walking back into the house and Stu and Randy come out of nowhere, arguing with each other, pointing the finger. Yeah. It's him. Yeah. Stu grabs Randy by the arm and throws him to the ground. Hilarious. And Sydney's reaction is great. Fuck you both. I don't know what to do, so I'm just locking the door on both of you.
Yeah.
Very good.
There's another bit that really makes me laugh at the beginning of the sequence, and it's when Gail's in the van, and then just Randy pops up like at the window, goes, "Oh, what's going on?" And she just sprays him in the face with a phone, like absolutely lays into him out of sheer panic.
Let's go.
That's really funny, really funny. Goes on like a sack of spuds.
There's a great wide shot when the van's pulling away and Randy's just sprawled out on the floor.
It's really funny. Oh, God. Yeah. I just love how the whodunit aspect of the film is still so brilliantly played out here, because it still feels this could be anyone. Everyone has a plausible alibi, but everyone looks dodgy in some way. The characters that seem obvious seem too obvious, and the way that Craven is just moving all these characters around like pawns in a chessboard, like the other kids have gone. Tatum's dead. Kenny's been killed. Oh my God, they killed Kenny. Gil and Dewey are out the equation.
Good.
It's Sid is properly alone. So it's like what PI is saying, that revelation that it's finally Billy. It should feel like a cheat, but it doesn't. It feels really, really satisfying that it has been Billy all along, just because they've played that ambiguity so well with him, and it makes perfect sense. But then you get that revelation that there's two of them all along. And it's said it before, but it's still such a great twist, because first time watching this, just had no inkling that there could be two of them. That's why it works so well, and it never feels cheap. And then I don't usually like scenes where the killer will stand and talk through their motivation.
No,
but I do think it's done really well here. And I still think it's the best motivation any Scream killer has ever had. And the way that it ties it all together, what happened to Sid's mother, what's been going on with Cotton Reevey kind of outside of the film, her disappeared father, who they're going to frame, why it's all been building up to happening on this night of all nights, all those red herrings, all those threads, all the questions, it just gets pulled together in the same way he explains why they're doing it, how they've done it, and how they're going to get away with it. I just find it all so satisfying to watch.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's great.
It's pulled together well, isn't it?
It is. Neve Campbell here as well. I can feel that sickness that she must be feeling in the pit of her stomach when she almost goes to faint.
Yeah.
I mentioned the editing at the start, and the film was cut to get an R rating, and that goes for this scene as well when Stu and Billy are knifing each other. Again, I think it's sloppy. It cuts to Sydney for reactions, and you can only hear what's going on. And it's clear as day that it's being cut, and it's not necessarily Craven's fault, but it always sticks out for me that.
Yeah.
He actually had to resubmit the film 9 times before being given the okay. And the reason that he had to do it so many times was because the MPAA weren't specific about what needed to be cut. Their notes were that the intensity needs to be brought down.
Right.
Not like, remove this, remove this, remove this. It's like, just bring the intensity down. Well, what the fuck does that mean?
Yeah.
Give us something to work with, guys. Matthew Lillard is not a fan of his performance in this film. He later said, I was horrible. I've got lots of gums, big teeth, and a really tiny fucking head.
Yeah. Just like...
Spitting. These days, you gotta have a sequel spit coming out of his mouth.
Spitting all over the shop. I mean, he made amends playing Shaggy in Scooby-Doo, though, didn't he?
Oh, yeah. That was his acting peak, I'm certain.
It was.
Lillard said, it's us completely losing our minds. I mean, that whole last sequence is us on a 10 and tubing scenery like nobody's business.
Oh, yeah.
He said, the idea that Wes Craven sat behind the monitor and was like, this is great. If I ever saw somebody do that on set, I'd be like, dude, bring it down 58%. 58, very specific. I want to talk about the moment where Sydney disappears, which sends Billy into a frenzy. Tearing up the furniture, feathers everywhere, and Stu turns into a blubbering mess. Oh, he's furious. It starts when Gail comes to save the day, but the safety catches off. But it's the phone call with Stu. Billy's so enraged that he throws the phone off him. And he's fucking hit me with the phone, dick!
Oh, it's hilarious. Love that.
He's been stabbed multiple times, but this is the one that hurts.
I think I'm dying here.
But it came as a result of Craven telling Ulrich to drop the phone onto Lilliard's head, and he didn't know about it. So that moment was improvised. Fucking hit me with a phone, dick! And he also improvised the line, my mom and dad are going to be so mad at me, when he starts crying, which is quite funny.
It is crying, like proper little baby.
Yeah. The moment where Sydney bursts out of the closet with the mask and the umbrella. Ulrich screams of pain were genuine. He'd had open heart surgery as a child, and the second stab of the umbrella tip missed the protective vest that he was wearing and hit him right in the sweet spot. Ooh, painful, really painful. And when Sydney pokes his gunshot wound, Craven saw this as an intimate reverse lovemaking following their hide the sausage act upstairs.
Right. No one else did, Wes.
Nobody else but you, Wes. And in the shooting script, the character of Dewey wasn't supposed to survive the mayhem, but Arquette's character was a big hit with test audiences. Craven brought him back in for reshoots when he's being rolled out of the house on the stretcher. Arquette didn't know what take Craven used until he saw the film at the premiere.
Oh, nice surprise for him.
Right, okay.
Yeah, nice surprise, yeah.
So he wasn't sure whether he survived or not.
Yeah,
The sequel.
And finally, I love that ending with Gail reporting on the night's events. It's got that Moby track, First Cool Hive in the distance, that ooh. And just as the sun's coming up, it's a really memorable ending for me. I love it.
Yeah.
As the camera pulls out like a crane shot. Very good. So it all began with the scream of 911 and ended in a bloodbath that rocked the town of Woodsboro.
Reception and awards.
Scream was released in December to appeal to teens who potentially were bored of traditional family Christmas goings-on. It didn't pay off at first. Variety labelled it DOA before its release because it was going up against One Fine Day and Beavis and Butthead. DOA because of Butthead. And it only earned $6 million on opening weekend, but strong word of mouth made it a sleeper hit. And on a budget of $15 million, it eventually grossed $173 million worldwide.
Unreal.
Huge. Mm-hmm. The LA Times called it a provocative send-up of horror pictures. Empire gave it 4 out of 5 and called it clever, quick, and bloody funny.
Mm-hmm.
Ruddy, bloody funny.
Ruddy, bloody funny. Roger Ebert gave the film, what do you think, out of 4 fellas? The obligatory Ebert review here.
I reckon he liked it, so I reckon he gave it 3.
3?
Does he do half marks, Ebert?
He does?
2.5.
Ooh. Matt, you're right. You're on the money. Ebert appreciated the writing and self-awareness of the characters, but wasn't sure if the violence was diffused, quotes, diffused by the ironic way the film uses it, and comments on it.
Right.
Right, okay.
However, Janet Maslin, writing in the New York Times, said, Craven wants things both ways, capitalizing on lurid material while undermining it with mocking humor. Not even horror fans who can answer all of the film's trivia may be fully comfortable with such an exploitative mix. Fuck you, Janet. So generally positive, and now Scream has 79% on Rotten Tomatoes and a score of 7.3 out of 10 on IMDb. Not massive, but respectable.
Yeah.
It was never going to win any Oscars or the Palme d'Or or anything like that, but it did well at the Saturn Awards, which honours films in sci-fi and horror mainly.
Yeah.
It won Best Picture, Best Writing, and Neve Campbell won Best Actress. Wes Craven was nominated for Best Director, but lost out to, who do you think? Sci-Fi and Horror, 96.
96.
Sci-fi horror 96.
Wasn't Alien Resurrection out that year? Was it the guy who did that?
It wasn't that one, no. Thank God.
Oh, I was going to say travesty. Oh, God, I have no idea.
It was Wes Craven for Scream, or no, we'll give it to Roland Emmerich for Independence Day.
Oh, my God.
Really?
Oh, dear
Yeah.
Lord.
Jesus.
Bad move.
Christ.
There have been a few grisly moments of the Scream series being accused of inspiring violent crime. One in particular became known as the Scream Murder. A mother was killed by her son and nephew in 98, and they claimed to be inspired by the first two films and bought a Ghostface costume and voice changer.
Wow.
However, in the years since, a study by economists Gordon Dahl and Stefano Della Vigna showed that for every 1 million people who watch a violent film on any given day, violent crime decreases in America by 1.2%.
Yeah. There you go, then.
Yeah. As the film says, movies don't create psychos. Movies make psychos more creative.
Yeah.
So, taking the industry by surprise in the mid-90s, Scream surpassed expectations and its place as the highest-grossing slasher movie ever, a record it held until 2018's Halloween. How ironic.
Oof.
Sequels and influence.
Scream had a huge impact on the industry in the mid-90s. Horror films were dead in the water, and slasher films even more so before Scream came along and completely revived the genre. We could easily argue that we wouldn't have the incredible horror films that we've had since if it weren't for the success of Scream.
Yeah.
It led to a slew of horror films being put into production in the few years that followed, starting a brand new teen horror cycle. Films like I Know What You Did Last Summer, Urban Legend, Final Destination, The Faculty, Disturbing Behaviour, Cherry Falls, all owe a great debt of gratitude to Scream.
Massively.
The Faculty was a Williamson script, as was I Know What You Did Last Summer, which he tried to sell for quite a few years before he wrote Scream and couldn't get it sold. Scream also made Dimension Films buy the rights to the Halloween franchise and bring Jamie Lee back for Halloween H2O in 1998 as well. Not to mention the teen TV show boom of the late 90s like Dawson's Creek and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. As mentioned, the Scary Movie franchise started in 2000, whose main source of parody was the Scream series, and anyone who went to see more than one of those should be thoroughly ashamed of themselves. In between all of this, Scream spawned its own iconic horror movie franchise, which is still going strong today. Starting with Scream 2, released almost a year to the day afterwards in 1997. Scream 3 followed in 2000. Then after an 11-year wait, Scream 4 was released in 2011 and was supposed to be the start of a new trilogy until Wes Craven sadly passed away in 2015. The series was revived only last month with the confusingly titled Scream.
Yeah.
Directed by Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillett. As if that wasn't enough as well, there's a 3-season TV show to sink your teeth into. So a lot to wade through.
Yeah, I saw that recently.
Matt, what are your thoughts on the sequels? Have you got a favourite?
Generally a case of diminishing returns, I would say. Although I did think this year's sequel was the best since 2, and 2 is my favourite sequel. Part of that is nostalgia because this one I was old enough to see at the cinema, and it was a great film to see there. I think it's got an excellent opening sequence in the American cinema when Jada Pinkett Smith gets killed. I really like
Fantastic.
that. I think Randy getting killed is still probably the most shocking moment in all of the Scream films. Really brutal, really just devastating to see him taken out.
Yeah.
And there's also a really good sequence with the crashed police car, I remember, later
really
on
tense.
in the film. That's really tense. And I thought the whodunit aspect is done pretty well there. So, yeah, I've watched Scream a lot recently, obviously, for this. I'm probably going to watch Scream 2 over the weekend, I think, so I'm in the mood to that. I would then skip the rest. Definitely the next year. I would probably give the new one another watch if it was available to stream. But, yeah 2 is easily the best sequel, I think.
Yeah. What about you, PI?
Well, I'm struggling for this question because I'll be honest, I can't remember which ones I've seen. And I definitely didn't feel like revisiting them just for this episode, to be honest. And the reason for that is I can't remember being blown away by any of them, and hence haven't remembered which one it is I watched. I'm pretty sure I've seen Scream 2, and I remember thinking I thought that was decent. I don't really remember anything about the plot. I'm pleased that Matt's kind of half reminded us there what's went on. I think that one's okay. But, certainly as far as my untrustworthy memory goes, I thought it was okay.
So it's 2 for you then?
2 for me.
By default. Yeah, hat-trick. I loved Scream 2 when I was younger, and I never really thought that it matched the original, but still great. Recent rewatches have impacted that because it's clear as day. It's nowhere near as good as the original. But it is still the best of the bunch for me. The third is definitely the worst. It's just so fucking loud. Just screams in the final third. And the revelation of the killer just becomes more and more ludicrous. It's Sidney's half-brother in the third one. It's a cousin in the fourth one. Silly.
Yeah. I mean, isn't a cousin in the fourth one like an 18-year-old girl as well who was supposed to believe can like jam a knife through someone's skull at some point?
Yes. Yeah, and she's very slight as well.
Yeah, very slight. I'm pretty sure she doesn't have the upper arm strength to do that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think she's combined with Kieran Culkin. He's the second killer in that one as well.
I forgot about that's
long
right.
hair.
Yeah, not great.
No shit. The most recent one, Scream, I think it's well worth a watch, and I agree. Probably the best sequel since the second one. Doesn't really say much, but again, it's a nostalgia thing, and I will be watching it again. So we've got our final Patreon question. Question number 3 from Craig Rooney.
Hello, Craig.
Hello, Craig, mate.
He says, do you guys think Scream is one of the most consistent horror series in film? The quality of the sequels, returning cast, and humour throughout. I think we know what Craig's stance is on that. Matt, do you think that?
Yeah, with the caveat that it's a pretty low bar. I don't think, there's loads of horror franchises that, are particularly great from beginning to end.
I don't think there are any.
Well, no, that's it. I mean, Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, there's some truly dreadful sequels in there with those. I mean, I don't think Scream has anything near as bad as those films get, but that's not necessarily a huge compliment, really, considering how bad, like, Halloween 5 or whatever is. So, only one that really comes to mind, I think the Final Destination films are quite fun.
You've got a soft spot, haven't you?
Yeah, got a soft spot for them. They're quite fun, but never great. And recently I did give the 2 sequels to The Omen a watch for the first time, actually, and I quite enjoyed them. So I'd maybe throw them in the argument.
A good shout. That's a good shout.
So I'd throw them into the argument.
Yeah, very good. What about you, PI?
Well, it's difficult because I'm not exactly the kind of go-to guy for horror films. I mean, would Scream automatically spring to mind for me? Probably not. But then, like Matt says, the bar is particularly low. I mean, I was thinking maybe I should mention something about the Alien films. That's what I'm going to be automatically drawn to. But then, aside from the first 2, the third film gets absolutely hammered by critics. I mean, I know it's a David Fincher film, but we know all about kind of how much. What was his inclusion in that film? The AVP movies are crap. Alien Resurrection's crap. So, I mean, potentially, like Matt's saying, such a low bar. Potentially, the Scream franchise films would be up there. I haven't got the answer for what's the best one because for the most part, aside from probably the first film that the rest of the franchise follows on for, the rest of them are crap. So it's up against just a load of other old tosh, to be honest.
Yeah, wins by default.
Well, I mean, yeah, potentially it could be mentioned as being one of the better ones by default.
Yeah. like, despite my comments about the film series, I do very much enjoy the films in the Scream series. I've seen them a number of times, and I will rewatch them. And I do think Craig raises a good point. There are not many film series who can keep hold of its main stars, up to and including the 5th installment.
Yeah.
That's true.
And maintain the original director for the first 4 films. And the only reason he didn't do the 5th one is because he passed on.
Passed away.
I think they are better written than most horror franchises, especially when you get past film 3 in any franchise. But I do have a big soft spot for the Friday the 13th series. Despite that having none of the talent in front or behind the camera that Scream has, that still is my favourite.
Yeah.
And that isn't the last we'll hear of Scream either. The success of the 5th installment means that a 6th film has already been greenlit and is due to start production this summer.
Wow.
And I got to be honest with you, I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'm a sucker.
Yeah,
I'm a
but
sucker for it.
You're a sucker
Such
for
an
any
easy
horror
mark.
film, though. It doesn't matter that it's Scream. You would
know.
quite happily go and watch anything if the genre said it's a horror film. You'd be like, oh, I'm up for
Right,
that.
okay, let's go. But there is a lot of nostalgia playing a part in that.
Oh, I bet, yeah.
So Scream's lasting legacy can be measured by the everlasting popularity of the sequels, the films it influenced, and the impact it had on the genre, the effects of which can still be felt today.
All the Right Movies ranking.
We've got one final surprise for you, and that is the All the Right Movies ranking. This is where we summarise and score the film out of 10. And PI, would you like to go first?
Well, I'm not a converted horror fan yet. I think that revelation will be for a future episode. But I do have a real fondness for this one because I do recall really enjoying it back in the late 90s, as I mentioned at the top. It has got that cool originality we've mentioned. There's some enjoyable because there's shocking and gruesome moments. In general, it's entertaining. It's got that impressive tone which almost pokes fun at itself. I've always enjoyed that aspect. For me, in general, I think the film, or the kind of my draw to this film, has dwindled over the years as I've got older. I think it's certainly more geared towards the younger film fan. I think that's obvious. I think that's why I enjoyed it so much when I was in my late teens. And it's got those iconic scenes that I could kind of buy into. But I've never really fancied watching it for years until, of course, I knew we were going to do the episode. So I've seen it once or twice over the last week or so. But prior to that, no real inclination to watch it again. It felt as if we kind of moved on from any enjoyment I was going to get out of it.
Right.
So with that in mind, I will be honest, I really enjoyed this film, but I don't get the same enjoyment out of it just because I'm older now. And I'm not watching it as a kind of as an 18 or 19-year-old or whatever.
Yeah.
So for me, with that in mind, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10.
8 out of 10. Hey, still a good score. Well, the film, it's obviously a classic, and I love it. I think it's got great cast and direction from Wes Craven, and it's bookended by 2 outstanding sequences, Barrymore at the start and the party at the end.
Yeah.
In between, there are some great character moments, great death scenes, and some outstanding writing. But as I said, there are a few moments in the screenplay that I've mentioned that don't quite hit the mark for me, and it doesn't quite have the unique chills in the film overall that some of the great slashers do. It's kind of like a sanitized version of those slashers, if you know what I mean. I think that may be down to the studio. It's a studio picture, the budget's bigger, and that's not what you get from like a $500,000 slasher film from 1981. And that's just a personal thing. But it can't be understated, the impact the film had, and that it still has, and that its popularity is still going. So I am going to give Scream a big 9 out of 10.
Well argued.
Matt?
I think it's still really easy to see why this was such a big hit, because it took a subgenre of horror that was a bit of a cheap joke, really, at the time.
Very
and
much.
just gave it such a sense of vitality and energy. And it gave it a reason to still exist in the 90s, and that's quite an accomplishment, I think. And watching it now, it's still very funny, it's still gripping, it's still smart, and it's got an unusually good cast, and that I think really does help elevate it above a lot of its like fellow slashers, basically. There's a few things, though, that for me are in the debit column. Like I said earlier, some lines in this film I find very clunky, very cringy now. And for me personally, doing this when we did Shaun of the Dead just 2 weeks ago doesn't do it any favours, because the slasher genre is not my particular favourite genre of horror, whereas I really do love zombie films. So I don't get the same response to what Craven and Williamson did to the slasher that are due to what Wright and Pegg did to zombie films.
Mm-hmm.
And also, to be honest, and I think this is what you're saying, Luke, as suspenseful as this film is, I've never found it particularly scary.
No.
So
No.
do have to take all that into account. But everything else is so good, it still does get quite easily a 9.
Yeah, agreed. Very good.
Nice marking.
Mm-hmm. To round things up, we've asked our Patreon supporters to help score the film. So the fourth score for Scream comes from them, another benefit if you sign up to be an ATRM Patreon supporter. I'm going to read out some comments before I get to the big reveal.
Okay.
Craig Rooney is back with a score. He said, a 10. Rejuvenated horror movies, great cast, iconic horror villain, and great costume. That opening act is flawless.
Yeah.
Brian H. said that he was born in 1974 and the joy of experiencing horror through the 80s, nothing scared me more than Freddy Krueger. When Scream appeared in theatres, I was fortunate enough to see and was blown away by it. The beginning of the film set the bar for the ensuing violence, and to kill off a name like Drew Barrymore at the start was bold and awesome. I still absolutely treasure this film today, and Neve Campbell is still as beautiful today as she was then. R.I.P. Mr. Wes Craven, one of the greats.
Yeah, he is.
No score?
A wonderful ode to Craven and horror movies and an evocative trip through time from Brian, but no score.
A mystery that will never be solved. Doesn't Brian understand there are certain rules?
He obviously does. He's subverting those rules.
Unbelievable. Wow. That's so meta. Love it.
Knew exactly what he was doing there.
And with brevity on his side, Dean Jones said, it's a Scream, 9 out of 10.
Lovely stuff.
Fantastic.
He's a good guy, Dean, like.
Yeah, he is. So with all the Patreon scores combined, Scream averaged, what do you think out of 10, fellas?
I think people who love this really love this. And I think it's just balanced out a bit by our score. So I think it'll be a 9.
Okay. And PI?
Yeah, I mean, I think great shout. I mean, going off the comments you've included there, it does have a lot of fans.
Mm-hmm.
I'd kind of want to score a little bit lower than I guess what you're saying, just to kind of legitimize my mark. So I'll say 8.5 average.
Okay. PI, your mark has been legitimized. It got 8 out of 10.
Wow.
See, it seems as though that the people who love them comment, and the people who don't love the films give them like 7 or 8.
Yeah.
Don't comment.
Just the score.
And
Right.
yeah,
Don't
just
comment
the
at all.
score. Yeah, that's happened a couple of times. It's happened with Shaun of the Dead a couple of weeks ago as well, Matt.
Yeah.
So with 2 9s and 2 8s, that gives Scream a combined score of 34 out of 40.
Bit low.
Lower than I anticipated.
I thought that would do better.
You can go to alltherightmovies.com/leaderboard to see where Scream shapes up against the other 61 films that we've covered so far. As mentioned, you can sign up to be an ATR and Patreon supporter by visiting patreon.com/alltherightmovies. You get access to a whole raft of podcasts, have a say in what films that we cover and the score that they get, and we would love that.
Yes, we would.
Please do.
Join us next time on All the Right Movies, on a podcast which will be 100% pure adrenaline, as P.I., Westy, and myself will be talking about action classic Point Break. Should be a blinder, P.I.
Absolutely can't wait for that one. Like, love
Yeah.
it. Loved it for years, and it's going to be a right blast because there's a lot to get my teeth into in there. Like, it's a great film.
Yeah, it
Great
is.
film.
I mean, and any chance to talk about Swayze.
High octane.
High octane. Swayze Boozy. Can't wait.
I can't wait for that.
Our most recent Patreon exclusive podcast is out next Friday. We're talking about 2 Jake Gyllenhaal films, Prisoners and Nightcrawler. Excited to talk about those 2. I think that's the 3 of us, isn't it, fellas?
I believe it is, yes.
The trio.
2 modern classics. And on top of all that, we've got YouTube videos going up all the time covering some of the best shots in movies. If you haven't already, subscribe, like, watch the clips. You won't be disappointed, with a variety of content going up there in the near future as well, so stay tuned.
Yeah, we're starting to build a nice library on
Yeah,
there.
very nice. We're on social media daily. You can check out our great content and tell us your favourite scary movie. On Twitter, we are at ATRightMovies. Instagram, at @all_right_movies. Search All the Right Movies for our Facebook group. And TikTok, at All the Right Movies. And our website is alltherightmovies.com. So we're going to cut it there, Casper. That's a wrap. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening, guys. Revitalized.